Chapter 639. Weihai laughed silently and didn't say a word. How was this Kong Yao as bad as this young general made her out to be? This woman wasn't a rare general talent, but she wasn't a mediocre general either. She would win every battle, at most she was a little more stable. Each time she fought with the barbarians north of Taishang, she had to gather the troops under her to use numbers to bully them. Although she used up a lot of resources, if she had such subordinates, she could be at ease and use them to take charge of an area. What this world lacked the most was this kind of talent. At this moment, he didn't have any intention to argue on behalf of Kong Yao. He also felt that the Gantian mountain ruler was too preposterous and frivolous. Rumors had it that this person was lustful, and that was true. These young people who were famous might have some ability. However, most of them were like that. With some achievements, they would be delighted and arrogant. Most of the time, those who rose up quickly would also fall down in the same way. Thinking about that, Weihai turned around, his expression turning solemn as he looked over coldly. Today, this Zhong Shou left in a fit of anger. Whether or not Gantian Mountain can send reinforcements is another matter. Kong Xian, you should know that we can only win and not lose this battle. Kong Xian's brow turned cold, bowing respectfully. I am 100% confident. I will be able to force back the Night Demon race within half a month. While he spoke, he didn't have the arrogance from before. He also didn't care about the few Huizhou Island city lords at the side. The few of them looked down like they didn't hear anything and didn't speak. One or two of them had joy in their eyes. Only those three Taoists were like statues, not reacting at all. Weihai chuckled, but didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the faintly discernible piece of land a few hundred miles to the east. My life's goal is to help our Taishang open up new land. A man should immediately become famous. If I can't become a marquis, I will die on the battlefield. If I can open up these 10 provinces for our Taishang, I can smile after I die. Kong Xian bowed once more and said respectfully, Your Majesty is wise, you are fair in your rewards and punishments. If we can win this battle, the imperial court won't be stingy with marquis rewards. Weihai looked expressionlessly at him and smiled. He didn't have any reaction, but his eyes were slightly gentle. I know that you are good at the art of war and think highly of yourself, which is why you are so arrogant and unrestrained. It is okay for a young man to have a temper, I can accept it. I also know that you have some grievances with that Kong Yao. However, the Gantian army was personally invited by His Majesty. If we can win, we can be of help. If we can't defend this place we can also help to cause to do so. At this time, it's best not to offend him too much. You should be careful with your words. His Majesty's SST to follow. His tone was dark and cold, causing Kong Xian to break out in cold sweat. He hurriedly said, I don't dare. Weihai nodded his head. After this beating, it was time to appease him. We will need your help in this battle. If we succeed, we will be able to do so. I, Weihai, will definitely help you ascend to the position of general. After all, Kong Xian was a little shrewd. Although he felt it in his heart, he didn't show it. Following which, Weihai said in deep thought, If Gantian Mountain sends troops over, we can't treat them too badly. If there are Gantian Mountain Blood Cloud cavalry, it will be a great help. You can prepare grain for 100,000 and send it over when the time comes. These words were said for the people behind him to hear. The few Huizhou city lords all bowed and acknowledged. His expression didn't reveal much of a troubled expression. Instead, it was filled with gratitude. Not to mention 100,000, even if 1,000,000 elite troops came, with the wealth of Huizhou, they would be able to support them. Since the guest army came, they should provide for them. Weihai didn't ask for much, obviously wanting to protect them. Originally, when they heard that Donglin was about to send troops over, they were a little worried. Now they could finally be at ease. Commander Weihai's kindness really made them respect him. Just as Weihai, Kong Xian, and the others were discussing, Zhong Shou was in the royal demon god shuttle and asked the few girls beside him curiously, "Why are you coming down for no reason?" Ruoshui was more obedient and knew that he just needed to stay for a while before leaving. She just stayed on the boat and didn't come down. Kong Yao's eyes were changing, her thoughts were really complicated. Just now, I looked at Lianyun Island and the formation seems a little inappropriate. There are many weaknesses between the towers. Moreover, there seems to be a formation on these islands. Kong Yao didn't need to say that. Zhong Shou could roughly sense it. There were some places where the strength was a little weak. If they wanted it, it would be because they lacked money. 109 armed spiritual crossbows were grade 9 spiritual artifacts. The crossbows and arrows that were equipped with them, as compared to those grade 9 beast crystals, even if they weren't as expensive, they still weren't cheap. It was obvious that they arranged it like that to save money. Zhao Yinran looked at Jingyin and didn't say anything. Although she didn't say anything, her expression was obviously saying that she followed this nun down the boat. Jingyin wrinkled her nose and said weirdly, "What a thick blood stench on the island." Zhong Shou was startled and looked at Jingyin. Blood stench? He was used to it. Which place where there were wars and killing wasn't like that? However, thinking about it now, the blood stench at that time was a little thicker. Speaking of which, this matter is really weird. The Taishang envoy rushed us so urgently, but this Weihai acted like nothing had happened. As Zhao Yanran said that, she took in a deep breath before hesitantly adding, "He is really confident." Her tone was really firm and filled with certainty. That was the feeling that Weihai gave people. Like he didn't care about the dangerous situation in front of him. The night demon race could be wiped out with a flick of his finger. He didn't reject their arrival, but he didn't care. Zhong Shou smiled. He felt the same way. Weihai's actions today were probably to let Zhong Shou know that he shouldn't think too highly of himself. Naturally, Gantian Mountain shouldn't think about getting too many benefits from coming to Huizhou. It was like they already treated Huizhou Island as theirs. Actually, if that was the case, it would be for the best. Gantian Mountain wouldn't need to waste resources to interfere in this matter. However, for some reason, he felt a little worried. However, compared to this matter, he was more worried about Kong Yao. Looking out, he saw that her face was totally devoid of blood. He immediately felt even more guilty. When he heard that person's words, he really had the impulse to take that person's head off on the spot. However, he was worried about what Kong Yao would think, which was why he didn't attack. Although he knew that decades later, the Kong family would betray Kong Yao. However, Kong Yao herself wouldn't know. He couldn't directly tell Kong Yao that most of her race members weren't reliable. All of a sudden, his heart was in a mess. Maybe he shouldn't have used such despicable methods on this woman? He also found it weird. What was going on with him? Why did he suddenly become so soft-hearted? This didn't seem like his personality. Even if he wasn't as vicious as those heroes, Zhong Shou knew that he definitely wasn't a merciful person. In the next instance, Kong Yao suddenly bowed towards him. "Can husband let me return to the army? I know that my ability to lead troops is far from Qiu Tingzhu and General Zhong Yuan and can't enter your eyes. However, in Donglin Cloud, there are less than 10 people who can beat Kong Yao in terms of military strategy. Even if you can only lead a small army in Gantian Mountain." Zhong Shou's brows rose up in shock as he looked over carefully. He saw that Kong Yao's face was filled with seriousness. How did this happen? This situation was out of his expectations. Her voice was actually filled with pleading. This was the first time she called him husband. What was going on? Looking closely at Kong Yao, he saw that her brows were filled with violent energy. Comprehending something, Zhong Shou took in a deep breath before shaking his head. "If you want to fight with me because of what that person said, I won't give up. However, I Zhong Shou can't be at ease. Even if it's a single soldier, I won't give you. Kong Yao was startled, looking weirdly at Zhong Shou before her expression calmed down. This time she thought about it for a long time before opening her mouth once more. Kong Yao's actions aren't just because of what Kong Xian said. I was born like this and loved to fight and kill. When I was young, I wanted to hold a 3-foot sword and sweep the battlefield. My race members all say that Kong Yao is a jinx. Maybe they are right. Can husband give me a chance? Her voice was really calm, but it was filled with an unshakable determination. Zhong Shou's brows were tightly furrowed and knew that Kong Yao wasn't speaking the truth. There had to be a reason for her actions today. However, since this woman didn't want to say, then he didn't need to ask. Let's talk about this matter in the future. He waved his hand, not agreeing nor rejecting. Zhong Shou looked away, acting like he was fully focused as he drove the royal demon shuttle. He directly tore open the void and entered the space layer outside of the cloud world. This place was filled with numerous black cracks that wreaked havoc all around. However, with the royal demon shuttle, he didn't need to worry. Although this item was a Grade 2 magical artifact, the material it was made of was a celestial artifact. After taking a few hits head-on, he found a narrow spiritual river and escaped into it. Kong Yao's body laid on the ground. Zhong Shou didn't reply for a long time before she stood up. Her face was still calm, but her eyes were filled with sadness and disappointment. Her aura was also really sad. Xian Yunlan couldn't take it anymore, but she didn't know how to persuade him. Zhao Yanran laughed coldly. She knew that the more Zhong Shou acted like that, the more he paid attention to Kong Yao. She really didn't know what was so good about this woman to make Zhong Shou spend so much effort on her. Moments later, she didn't bother about it anymore, turning her eyes to look outside of the shuttle. This is the night demon? Only to see 1 or 2 people pass by in the spiritual river. Their bodies and appearances were similar to humans, but their skin was black. If they hid in the night, without a certain level of cultivation, one wouldn't be able to notice them. They had a pair of bat wings on their back, not looking like the green face and fangs of the legends. However, his appearance was indeed extremely ugly. At this moment, even Kong Yao's eyes were attracted over. Chapter 640. The few people in the shuttle were totally silent. The atmosphere was really suppressive. It was rumored that during the ancient cloud desolate era, the alien races of various worlds invaded and caused the deaths of billions of living beings in the cloud world. Many races that were born during that era were wiped out. The Night Devil clan was one of the most powerful foreign clans in the world. It was said that during their peak, there were close to 100 million night demons that descended in the cloud world. If it wasn't for these alien races having conflicts with one another, the night demon race would have died. At that time, the human race would have given birth to several heroes. After the 3 generations of saint emperors, there were many more talent. There were also many people who risked their lives to merge with the god-beast bloodline to chase them out. The current cloud world was most probably occupied by these alien races. They also didn't know if they would have a chance to live in this world. However, even during the mid to late stages of the cloud desolate era, the spiritual energy sources of the cloud world were sealed one by one. The night demon race didn't have any selfish motives and would occasionally descend. Pretty much each battle would cause blood to flow like a river and tens of millions of cultivators would fall. Every time they read history, they would be shocked. However, after all, it was something that happened tens of millions of years ago, so the few of them didn't feel much about it. However, personally witnessing it now, they could feel the suffocating heaviness. Zhao Yanran suddenly acted, tossing a talisman out of the shuttle, only to see the talisman explode in midair, turning into a strong light that covered a night demon that passed by. A Grade 3 talisman caused the night demon to cry out in pain. In the blink of an eye, its skin and flesh started to fester. Yanran Zhao also laughed coldly. This race is indeed afraid of light. History records that if there was no need, The ancient night demon army would choose to fight at night. Every day there would be no traces of them. They would either stay within the camp or choose some dark and damp places to rest. Xian Yunlan looked expressionlessly at her and then shook her head. They are only afraid of strong light. The history records say that they hate light. Just as she spoke, the night demon finally managed to hold on until the light dissipated. The festering skin all over his body instantly started to heal. With a furious roar, he flew up into the air and chased after the shuttle. They weren't very fast and were quickly left behind by the Royal Demon Divine Shuttle. However, the ferocious aura they gave off left a deep impression. Zhao Yinran's eyes also narrowed slightly. This night demon's strength was only equivalent to a 5th-grade human cultivator. The injury was only on the surface of his skin, and he was only afraid of strong light. Ordinary sunlight wouldn't be able to harm these mantis demons. Furthermore, his self-healing ability was also quite strong. To be able to heal a portion of his wounds in just a few breaths was truly shocking. Zhong Shou calculated in his heart. This night demon's strength should be at least 20% higher than a human warrior of the same level. With the help of their bat wings, they could fly in the air. Their agility was not something that human martial artists could compare to. There was an invisible balance between all living beings in the world. Whatever the heavens gave you, they would definitely take away. For example, those divine beasts were strong, but most of them were unable to reproduce, and it was difficult for them to have children. As for these night demons, although they were afraid of light, they had strength that humans didn't have, as well as various abilities. One night demon needed at least 2 cultivators of the same grade to deal with. No wonder this race could roam the various worlds. Naturally, this wasn't a fixed number. The few people in the Royal Demon Divine Shuttle were all exceptions. Although they were females, they were all perversely strong, able to sweep an area. The deeper they went, the more night demons they would see. This spiritual river was narrow, but Zhong Shou didn't care. As long as there was something blocking the way, he would barbarically charge over. Along the way, blood and flesh flew all about, causing those night demons to fight to avoid him. However, within the shuttle, the expressions of the few people were really solemn. Along the way, there wasn't a single one that was below grade 4. They passed through several forks and entered the wide world river. Zhong Shou suddenly had an idea and looked forward. He saw a giant piece of wood with a majestic aura flying over from the distance. Looking out, one couldn't see the end of it. Who knows how long it was, but it was 30,000 feet wide. The center was already dug out, and one could see hundreds and thousands of night demons entering and exiting from the gaps. In comparison, the 6 spaceships of the Shui family were like ants in front of a giant. Zhong Shou's expression changed slightly, his heart filled with shock and also feeling relaxed. What shocked him was the scale of the night demons attacking the cloud world. Just this giant piece of wood could fit millions of people. What made him relaxed was that there were still many grade 3 night demons that appeared from this giant piece of wood. He also thought to himself that no wonder those Taishang envoys would rush them. Why would Dowling Vast Habitat want to give up those mined stone veins? This wasn't a normal problem. He frowned again. Such a large army. With the current strength of Gantian Mountain, even if they used all their resources and manpower, they could only barely block them. He really didn't know where Wei Hai got his confidence from to be able to win. Was there something wrong with his head? He had many questions in his heart. Zhong Shou shook his head and was too lazy to think about it. If Wei Hai had a way to deal with it, then it would be for the best. This Huizhou Island was something that people coveted, but he didn't have to fight for it. With a thought, the Royal Demon God shuttle directly turned around and headed back in the direction they came from. He took the risk to come here just to know the enemy and to see what the situation was like. Since he knew the rough situation, then there was no need to take the risk. After all, he was the ruler of a country. It was better to let others do such things. However, just as the royal demon god shuttle flew back, Zhong Shou scoffed coldly. You killed so many of my subjects and you want to leave just like that? Just as he finished speaking, a majestic red light suddenly flew out from the huge ancient tree and fell straight towards them. Zhong Shou felt a chill in his chest as he turned around in shock. An extremely dangerous chill pierced right into his brain. Red star god lightning? Pretty much without even thinking, Zhong Shou pulled it out. When the sword light rose up, it connected with the Avicii throne at the peak of Gantian Mountain. A pure white sword light, mighty and incomparably sharp, swept behind him. In the next instance, there was a sharp clang as the red glow was slashed into pieces. Then, tens of thousands of red star god lightning exploded and seeped out. In this void, it continuously jumped and flashed. It destroyed all the void barriers within 1,000,000 feet. However, in the end, it was still slower than the god shuttle. Oh! That voice let out a cry of surprise, clearly quite surprised. In the end, he broke out into a laugh. King Path Martial Arts, so the ruler of a country personally came here. Which ruler of the cloud world are you? Chapter 641. King Path Martial Arts, so the king of a country has personally come here. Which ruler of the cloud world are you? Along with this voice, a black body flew out from the giant ancient tree. With a flap of his wings, he was close to 1,000 miles away. He chased after the royal demon god shuttle. His speed was actually faster than it. In just a few breaths, he had chased up to the shuttle. Esteemed guest has arrived and I can't personally welcome you. How impolite. You don't have to leave in such a hurry, why not stay and have a chat? He grabbed out with a palm and energy gathered from all around, grabbing towards the direction of the royal demon god shuttle. Although he wasn't able to truly grab it, it still caused the shuttle to shake. There were also numerous red star god lightning which exploded and spread out. Zhong Shou didn't panic at all, directly abandoning the control formation of the shuttle and telling the few women beside him to take over. His body flashed, and he was at the back of the shuttle, laughing out loud. I am an evil guest and you aren't a good master. It is best if I don't stay, there is no need to send me off. Forming a seal with his hands, a pair of lightning wings spread out behind Zhong Shou's back, extending 10,000 feet. Then, the scarlet flame ignited and dyed the purple electric current black. In an instant, it also spread across the sky, continuously clashing and entangling with the red lightning that struck from all directions. They were actually on the same level for dozens of breaths. The black body in the distance exclaimed once more. Heaven-burning flame? Lightning phoenix purple lightning? Interesting, what relationship do you have with the Liu family? At this moment, his movement speed had already slowed down. Each time he flapped his wings, he would only travel 1 to 200 miles. Zhong Shou was expressionless and didn't have any intention of replying. The black body laughed coldly. Before ruler leaves, why don't you take one more blade from me? All of a sudden, the space shattered without any warning. The spiritual river collapsed and the entire space layer returned to a chaotic and disorderly state. Boundless void energy and spiritual energy from all directions gathered together at this moment, forming a long saber that slashed across the sky. Zhong Shou's eyes widened and then narrowed. It was said that the martial path and spiritual spells of the cloud world were formed by combining the martial arts of many alien races. It seemed like it really made sense. Be it the red star god lightning that this person used or the knife just now, they were all similar to some martial arts of the cloud world. The saber shadow was already very close. Zhong Shou, on the other hand, closed his eyes, his heart silent. He focused on visualizing the will of the various true dragons. The Platinum Dragon, Azure Wood Dragon, Thunder Dragon, Mysterious Een Dragon, Blazing Flame Dragon, Instant Space Dragon, 9 Dragon Shadows, Stack. One shouldn't bite off more than they can chew. He knew that the true essence of the 9x9 true dragon sword lay in unity and unity. However, at this very moment, the first thing he had to do was the word stack. Clang! A soft sound that couldn't be heard reverberated throughout 1,000 miles. The sword in Zhong Shou's hand suddenly came out of its sheath. The sword light turned into a dragon, gathering a blazing white energy as it struck towards the void. 6 types of true dragon sword intense stacked together. It also gathered the King Path energy that the Avicii throne injected into him, causing Zhong Shou's sword attack to instantly rise to the maximum. The sword's shadow and the blade collided, causing a series of rumbling sounds in the air. The surrounding void started to explode. That giant saber instantly split into numerous saber shadows and continued to strike towards the royal demon god shuttle. Zhong Shou had expected this. The sword shadow in his hand also split into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8. In 1,000th of a second, it split into millions of sword shadows, smashing those saber glows into pieces. On the other hand, the flying shuttle was getting faster and faster, its extreme speed increasing once more. It was actually using gravity as Zhong Shou gathered it at the back of the boat to help push it forward. When the Black Shadow saw that, he finally stopped and didn't chase anymore. Good sword technique. I heard that in the current cloud world, there is a ruler who is famous for his sword techniques and is recognized as the head of the 6-pinnacle sword. Are you the Gantian country ruler, the monster Kenzo sect protector? Zhong Shou smiled. He didn't deny nor agree. He wiped off the blood at the corner of his lips, suddenly waving his sleeves in the chaotic space. Suddenly, a silver light rose up and pierced into it. My cloud world has a saying that it is impolite not to reciprocate. You are so hospitable and have treated me so well, I have to return the favor. Please try to take this saber of mine. That Black Shadow didn't feel anything at the start. Only when Zhong Shou said that did he feel that something wasn't right. A sense of danger rose in Xiao Chen's heart, and a sense of fatal danger surged in his chest. However, when he used his spiritual sense to search around, there was no trace. He didn't even think. Numerous red lightning bolts rose up into the sky around his body. He suddenly punched out, and a wall of energy spread out in all directions. Only then did his spiritual sense vaguely find a trace of it. Flying knife. The Black Shadow's brows rose up, only to see a silver light appear in front of him. It was like it had its own intelligence, and after he noticed it, it didn't try to hide anymore. Just like the sword shadow that split apart. 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 4. Another spiritual sense rose up. Like this saber had used up all of Zhong Shou's strength, the energy was extremely sharp. In just a moment, the aura had exploded out to such an extent that even he was shocked. Just a small trick you dare to show off in front of me? With a soft sigh, the spiritual thoughts of the black figure had already found the trace of the real body of the flying knife in less than a moment. He directly flicked out with his finger, and as expected, the flying knife there shattered. The sky full of knife shadows also dissipated along with it. He shook his head in disdain, thinking about whether or not to continue chasing. Only then did the Black Shadow suddenly realize that the sense of danger in his heart hadn't disappeared even until now. His brows rose up as he focused once more. The Black Shadow suddenly roared out like a tiger. He flapped his bat wings and retreated in a flash. However, he changed dozens of directions, but he still felt that sharp piercing feeling in his heart following him like a shadow. It was also becoming sharper and more dangerous. He punched out once more. Within the overflowing energy, the Black Shadow finally caught a glimpse of that thing. It was still a light and dim knife shadow, but within it was actually filled with yin and yang, 2 totally different types of true energy. It brought the flying knife to attack in a spiral, breaking in front of him like there was no one there. It was already less than half an inch away from his throat. He only felt his mind go blank, and the scenes in front of his eyes suddenly collapsed. Before this, he didn't even hit the flying knife, and the thousands of knife shadows before were just illusions. This was obviously sword intent buffing. The artifact could be connected to its spirit. This knife was definitely buffed by some martial path secret technique. Who knows how long it had been nurtured for, but now it was connected to its spirit. It was connected to its master's mind, like a flying sword that a cloud world spiritist could control, freely changing. However, the amount of power it contained was far from what a flying sword could compare to. It was pretty much the full-strength strike of a spirit realm cultivator. Apart from that, it also contained spiritual power, along with the King Path aura. This was spirit and martial arts merging into one. Within the intent, there was also an unreasonable overbearingness. He frowned, a solemn expression flashing across his eyes. The moment the black shadow thought about it, his fist speed increased once more. The strength of the energy instantly climbed another level. However, he saw that the flying dagger actually took the opportunity to descend and completed an extremely exquisite change of direction in midair, turning its target to his lower abdomen. One knife and one person, they continuously changed directions in midair, one chasing and one fleeing, continuously exchanging blows. In the end, he only heard a "chi" sound as the black shadow stopped in midair. He frowned as he looked at his left arm, only to see that the flying knife was stuck diagonally in his arm. Luckily, he went all out just now, causing the yin and yang spiral energy within the flying knife to be reduced by a large half. If not, just that knife would be able to rip the flesh and blood of his left arm to shreds. However, at this moment, the energy also followed those meridians and attacked upwards, making him feel really uncomfortable. Looking in front of him once more, that flying shuttle was long gone. He spread out his spiritual sense, but he didn't sense anything. It should have returned to the cloud world. The black shadow was startled, following which he gave out a self-mocking laugh. With his middle spirit realm strength, he was injured by a cloud world cultivator who was only heaven realm. This time, he had really made a fool of himself. Suddenly, there was a weird fluctuation around his body. A figure then appeared in front of him. He was wearing a golden shirt. His face could be considered handsome even in the eyes of the human race. Even if the night demon race didn't cultivate, they would live for thousands of years. They wouldn't age at all and would be as strong as when they were adults. They didn't have the concept of old people. However, this person gave one a really old feeling. He retracted his aura and stood in midair. If one didn't personally see him, it was like he didn't exist. That is the Gantian king of the cloud world, Monster Kenzo sect protector? To be able to use peak heaven realm strength. To be able to fight with you and not be at a disadvantage. It seems like the cloud world cultivators really can't be underestimated. Jia Mingluo shook his head slightly. This was a world where numerous end realm cultivators had appeared. There were even people who were half a step to true realm. That Shi Zi Hu Tsang Xing Dao was famous in the various worlds. Unfortunately, he fell early on 10,000 years ago. He caused the night demon race to return in defeat. How could such a world be underestimated? That knife is so strong. He still focused on his left arm. Then, he frowned. However, it shouldn't be able to hurt me. It was really weird. That flying knife was something that no one below spirit realm could take. Anyone who saw it would die. Above spirit realm, night demon cultivators of the same grade as him would have to retreat. However, he was one of the 12 princes with the purest bloodline who had the right to inherit the throne. How could he be compared to those normal combat cultivators? However, just now it did make one feel weird. Why was he charmed by those knife shadows for no reason? With his will, he should be able to see through all illusions below spirit realm. There was no reason for him to be charmed. It should be the illusionary heart mirror. Don't forget that this person is the king of the fox race. Chapter 642. It should be the illusionary heart mirror. Don't forget that this person is the king of the fox race. The golden-armored night demon was in deep thought, thinking back to the news he had heard not long ago. I heard that the eight-tailed Shwe family has brought the illusionary heart mirror back to the cloud world. Illusionary heart mirror? But I heard that the Gantian mountain Zong family only has the seven-tail blood? Jia Mingluo frowned. He only had a rough impression of the cloud world. However, the rough situation of the cloud world races that made the night demons suffer 10,000 years ago, as well as those treasures, was still clear to him. They also had their own sources of information in the current cloud world. Then, he shook his head and didn't care anymore. If it wasn't for the illusionary heart mirror, that knife definitely wouldn't have been able to hurt him. If those shadow demons know that this mirror has appeared, they will be delighted. Jia Mingluo scoffed coldly and his lips were filled with mocking intent. Then, he felt slightly weird, but that person has the spiritual mirror, so why did he come here so grandly? With the Sky Fox illusionary technique, he should be able to come and go without a trace. I don't know about that. The golden-armored night demon shook his head. Although he was smart, he wouldn't waste his brain power on such things that he couldn't understand and would never have an answer to. The Emperor sent you here to test the strength of the cloud world before the spiritual wave. Maybe this person has the same intentions. That was the only explanation that made sense. Prince Jia Mingluo frowned and felt that this wasn't the case. However, he was too lazy to dwell on this matter. I heard that this person is just 17. Although he is from the monster race and isn't the legendary God Emperor candidate, he is our enemy. The place we are attacking is less than 16,000 miles away from Gantian Mountain. If this person knows that we are all interdependent, he definitely won't sit still and do nothing. While saying this, Prince Jia Mingluo clenched his fists. If we want to attack the cloud world, maybe this kid and Gantian Mountain are our true enemies. The golden-armored night demon laughed when he heard this. Looking at it, that Taishang commander doesn't think so. Recently he seems to be preparing something and is a little sneaky. That cloud ocean is about to be dyed red by blood. It's nothing more than a blood sacrifice. Do you really think that we don't know anything? Using the blood and souls of tens of millions of people to seal the realm. I didn't expect the cloud world to have such a secret technique. His words were filled with disdain and ridicule. Jia Mingluo chuckled and said, "In the eyes of the other worlds, we night devils are the cruelest and most bloodthirsty. However, they wouldn't easily kill their own clansmen, nor would they use their clansmen's blood as sacrifices. You can't say that. After all, the human race is different from us night demons. It concerns the survival of our race, so there is nothing wrong with that." The golden-armored night devil shook his head, but he couldn't think of any words to defend himself. However, since we know what the Taishang commander is planning, we should make some preparations. His tone was really casual. He didn't care about the 10 million blood sacrifice formation at all. The Night Demon clan had once attacked thousands of worlds. They had seen too many situations like this. Suddenly, the void shook violently. Both of them looked towards the source of the tremors. In this chaotic space, one couldn't see with their eyes. However, they could feel two extremely strong powers clashing. The two of them knew that there were Saint Realm cultivators fighting there. The Cloud World had 5 World Protector Venerables who were all Saint Realm. If he couldn't defeat them, his army definitely wouldn't be able to invade the Cloud World. He silently sensed. Roughly 30 minutes later, Jia Mingluo's brow rose up and he was filled with joy. Success. Actually, it couldn't be considered a victory. The two huge powers clashed with one another in the void. With their spiritual senses, they were unable to know the outcome. They could only sense that the spiritual senses of both sides were retreating like a wave, breaking away from contact. The final result should be a stalemate. However, even if that was the case, it was enough for him. However, just as this joy appeared on his face, all of a sudden, a beam of sword light shot out from the void. It was light and vast, so unbelievably quick that the two of them nearly thought that it was an illusion. Before they were able to react, the sword light had already slashed onto the giant wood. With one slash, the endless giant wood was smashed into pieces. Numerous night demons within were struck by the sword energy, their bodies shattered and they died. Some of them were thrown into the void, where they were torn into thousands of pieces by the rampaging spatial cracks. The sword light came quickly and left just as quickly. Just as he was changing positions in the air, another powerful force reached out and forced him back. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared. Only the world river was left in a mess. Jia Mingluo's face turned green as he exchanged glances with the golden-armored night demon beside him. They could see the shock and loss in each other's eyes. This was the Sixth Saint Realm. Was he from the Kenzo sect? Was he the Sixth World Protector Venerable? This sword was truly swift and fierce. Even a deity realm cultivator wouldn't be able to move this giant tree. Saint Realm Venerables should have needed to spend some effort. However, this person cleanly scattered it in one strike. Looking forward, Jia Mingluo's frown deepened. Out of the 10 million troops he brought, 60% of them were dead. Of the remaining 10% were seriously injured. The strength of a Saint Realm expert was actually so strong. A moment later, Jia Mingluo took in a deep breath. No worries. My elites are still alive. If we are careful, we can sweep the cloud world. The golden-armored night demon's brow rose up when he heard this. Then, he smiled. Although he faced a huge setback, he didn't feel dejected at all. Only such a person was worthy of his full support. He used his spiritual sense to sense that the sword intent had totally retreated. Although they were heavily injured, the two of them were prepared to enter the cloud world. Just 1,000 miles away from the two of them, Zhong Shou also personally witnessed the scene of the sword light slashing over. His expression was extremely solemn. Since he had already used the illusionary heart mirror, then Zhong Shou wasn't in a rush to leave. The royal demon god shuttle stopped at the same spot. It was really relaxed as it listened to the two of them speak. This is the Saint Realm? It wasn't that he hadn't seen Saint Realm experts before. Long Ying, Aokuan, and that Tanxiu who he didn't know which senior master he was. There were a total of 3 of them. However, this was the first time he personally saw a saint go all out. As expected, it had an aura that couldn't be shaken by heaven and earth. If it was a smaller world, this strike would have shattered it. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief. The strength of the night demon race exceeded his expectations. If this boundless giant tree really charged into the cloud world, then there was no need to fight this battle. At that time, they could just raise their hands and surrender or just flee the cloud world. He then drove the shuttle and sped about in the world river. Without a sound, he kept dozens of pieces of the giant wood into the shuttle. Zhong Shou took one and took a close look. Then, his brow rose up, filled with a weird expression. What kind of wood was this? Why was it so firm? It was so firm that his spiritual sense couldn't reach in. When he held it in his hand, it was as heavy as metal. Zhong Shou used his spiritual sense to take out his sword and slashed. However, after a low thud, the sword light actually rebounded, nearly injuring him. Only a faint white mark was left on the broken wood. Zhong Shou wasn't shocked but delighted instead, his eyes lighting up. Good stuff. The expressions of the girls within the shuttle changed when they saw this. Even a fool would know that this was good stuff. Zhong Shou used at least 30% of his strength in that strike. However, he could only slightly damage the surface. Using it as a material to craft spiritual artifacts, who knew how strong it would be? Zhong Shou wanted to use this wood as the dragon bone to modify the 6th spaceship. That would be perfect. If he had enough giant wood shards to embed into the outer shell of the spaceships, he could save a lot of materials. Within the world river, he he could basically charge around. As the shuttle sped forwards, Zhong Shou tossed aside all his worries and went all out to collect the floating wood shards. At this moment, he only felt that his heaven and earth bag wasn't big enough. The other girls, apart from Kong Yao who had nothing, all joined in to collect. Even Jingyin got a few pieces. They were all 3,000 feet long. Anyways, the heaven and earth bag was wide enough, so they didn't have to worry about not being able to fit them all. Zhong Shou pretty much stuffed his Lingjie ring to the brim. His 4 to 5 heaven and earth bags didn't have anything left. He didn't bother about those 6,000 feet and below. What he collected were all 6,000 feet and above. As for those 10,000 feet and above that could be turned into spaceship dragon bones, he stuffed them into the shuttle. Anyways, this royal demon god shuttle could be big or small. It could change the length of a finger, or it could be 100,000 feet wide. It didn't have any movement techniques. Actually, this shuttle itself could be considered a spaceship. The shuttle turned into light, and everywhere it passed, all the large pieces of wood were swept clean. However, there were still illusions here, such that the night demons around didn't notice anything. In just a few breaths, Prince Jia Mingluo sensed something. Zhong Shou. With an explosive shout, a dark black saber light chiseled over. Maybe because he was still unable to deduce the exact location of the royal demon god shuttle. The attack completely enveloped the entire space as it swept across the area. Zhong Shou laughed and knew that it was time to stop while he was ahead. Prince Jia Mingluo was okay. Although he wasn't at Spirit Realm, he could use the power of the Avicii throne. However, at this moment, the golden-armored night demon beside him moved without any wind. Who knows what spell he was preparing, but the spiritual light fluctuations made his heart beat uncontrollably. The illusionary heart mirror behind him was also trembling. Zhong Shou shook his head and looked forward regretfully. The giant wood was sliced, but because the insides were hollowed out, it was also struck by the sword energy and broken into dozens of pieces. At this moment, the one in front of him was the biggest one. It was 30,000 feet long and 20,000 feet wide. With this material, it was enough to build a spaceship. Moreover, he didn't need to spend much money, he just needed to carve it. When it was built, it would be the sturdiest spaceship. However, thinking about the consequences, Zhong Shou decided to give up on forcefully dragging it into the cloud world. Chapter 643. After escaping from the chaotic world river until he returned to the cloud world, Zhong Shou still felt really regretful. If he could have such a giant piece of wood to modify into a giant ship, it would be enough to carry 400,000 Gantian mountain elites. Even the scraps could be used to craft spiritual artifacts, and he could earn a huge sum. He wouldn't have to worry about modifying the spaceship anymore. Sighing, Zhong Shou drove the royal demon god shuttle to stop. Just now, he had clashed with Prince Jia Mingluo who chased over. Although they were on the same level, using the help of the illusionary heart mirror, he was able to escape easily. However, Zhong Shou himself had consumed a lot of energy and his organs shifted. However, all of this was far from the illusionary heart mirror. He pointed with his hand and caused the green mirror to turn into a ball of light and enter his sleeve. Zhong Shou smiled bitterly. He had only used this item for 2 hours. What he used was the most basic illusionary technique. However, in just this short time, he had used up 3 years of his lifespan. If he used it a few more times, he would die of old age. Xian Yunlan was also worried for him. Before ruler breaks through to spirit realm, it is best if you don't use this illusionary heart mirror. After saying this, she took out a zither and played. A crisp ding-dong sound immediately reverberated within the flying shuttle. It was a peaceful God-purifying tune. Along with the clear zither music, the surging vital energy in Zhong Shou's body calmed down. Just as he was listening and appreciating, Zhong Shou suddenly felt his brow heat up and a pure essence energy injected in. The injuries in his body were instantly healed by a large half. Zhong Shou looked back in shock, only to see Zhao Yanran turn her head. Don't misunderstand, I am just taking pity on you and taking these pieces of wood as payment. Zhong Shoxin knew that it was the case. How could this woman be so kind? Essence energy feedback to help him heal? At this moment, Ruoshui was looking at a piece of wood in a daze. In the end, she placed it behind her head and let out a satisfied moan. It was even more comfortable than sleeping on Zhong Shou's foxtail. Zhao Yanran was also curious about this piece of wood. I wonder what kind of tree this is to be able to grow so big? If it was in the cloud world, this tree could probably reach the stars. Legend has it that during the cloud desolate era, there was a tree that reached the heavens. It was 200,000 zhang tall and would require 100,000 people to wrap their arms around it. It was comparable. Unfortunately, it was cut down at the beginning of the cloud desolate era. Zhong Shou also fell into deep thought. The pieces of the giant tree in front of him could not possibly be the giant tree that reached the sky. That was a divine object, and its grade was much higher than this huge tree. A Saint Realm expert would at most be able to inflict heavy injuries, but they definitely wouldn't be able to destroy it. However, I heard that there is a different world not far from the cloud world. The land there was almost entirely filled with towering trees. As long as it grew for 3,000 years, it would have a spiritual sense and be able to speak. It would also have vast abilities. Each of them would control some living beings and would be really strong. Actually, this piece of wood is considered small. This knowledge was obtained when he was Tanqiu. He thought that this item was probably obtained by the night demon race from that world. When these giant trees had a spiritual sense, they could be compared to God realm experts. For the night demon race to be able to enter and obtain something, one could see how strong they were. Zhao Yanran didn't believe him and scoffed. You have never left the cloud world, so how would you know? You are lying, right? Zhong Shou laughed and didn't say anything. Why did this woman have the same reaction as Yi Feishuang and Yi Feiyan? Thinking about those two sisters, he missed them. Who knows how those two girls were? He said that if they faced danger, they could escape to Gantian Mountain to hide. No matter how strong Juelong City was, they wouldn't dare to find trouble with him. Since they didn't come, they probably didn't face any danger. The few women talked for a while, and then started to discuss what artifacts they should craft from the wood. It would be best if they could carve it into jewelry. However, they were arguing about what style they should be. Zhong Shou's eyes were opened. So this crazy Zhao Yanran also had a little girl side to her. Jingyin actually added in a few sentences which surprised him. It seemed like this nun wasn't totally pure and didn't have many desires. Maybe because she was embarrassed by his gaze, Jingyin realized that her words were inappropriate. Her face flushed red as she hung her head in front of her body and didn't speak anymore. This shy scene caused Zhong Shou's eyes to open wide. Jingyin's chest was actually no weaker than Shui's. Before this woman was wearing a wide robe and it couldn't be seen. Now that she lowered her head and pressed down on her clothes, her swollen chest was totally revealed. Just as his heart was rippling, Kong Yao's voice rang out at the wrong time. Husband, the night demons are strong. If Gantian Mountain wants to win, we need to use a special strategy. Zhong Shou's heart shook as he remembered the important matter. Thinking back to the dense and majestic night demon army in the World River, he felt his heart tighten. Even if we want to fight, we can't do it in Huizhou. We need to avoid their sharpness and split up their strength. That is the best way. Now we can go with the flow. Zhong Shou knew what she meant. But this bunch of night demons occupied Huizhou. They needed to split up troops to defend against the Taishang and deal with the various sections. Gantian Mountain had the geographical advantage, and it would be much easier to deal with them. However, after thinking about it, Zhong Shou still shook his head. I will defend against them outside of the country. Donglin has been in chaos for 3,000 years and has only been peaceful for a few months. How can I bear to let my people suffer from the chaos of war? In his heart, he was thinking about the roads and piers that he had invested in. Now, many of them were completed. There were also the shops under his name that had expanded to the east of Donglin. If war started once more, how was he going to earn money? Wouldn't all the beast crystals and mind stones that he had invested go to waste? Moreover, if many people died, who would he collect taxes from? How could he allow that to happen? This was why not only did he need to end this battle outside of the country, but the faster the better. Kong Yao kept silent, looking at Zhong Shou in a daze. Then, she turned her head away, thinking to herself, if it was the Taishang, the emperor that she was originally loyal to, what would he do if he faced such a situation? He knew that fighting the night demon race in Donglin was the best way, but he was still so dumb to take such a huge risk and choose to fight in Huizhou. She didn't know what to say about this person. He couldn't bear for his people to suffer from the chaos of war? Jingyin raised her head once more, her eyes shining brightly. She was actually filled with respect. Ruler is benevolent, no wonder the people of Gantian Mountain love and respect you so much. In the past, when she praised Zhong Shou, it was just for show. His words today were filled with sincerity. Only Zhao Yinran saw through Zhong Shou's dark thoughts and laughed coldly. This fellow probably couldn't bear to part with the money. Zhong Shou gave a reserved smile, feeling the true qi in his body recover slightly. He drove the Royal Demon God shuttle and continued to fly. The Royal Demon God shuttle was actually named Royal Demon. What it was good at wasn't speed. It was that this treasure was tough and durable, able to take hits, which was why gods and demons avoided it. Just now, in the battle with Prince Jia Mingluo, it wasn't damaged at all. However, at this moment it was carrying who knows how many kilograms of wood fragments, so its speed dropped by several times. He flew leisurely through the clouds. Before this, in the space layer, there was no concept of gravity, which was why it wasn't affected at all. However, now that it was in the cloud world, it was as slow as a turtle crawling, not much faster. Zhong Shou wasn't in a rush, slowly flying through the air. Zhao Yinran felt that she couldn't take it. Along the way, she saw a few grade 7 lightning rocks overtaking them and passing by the shuttle. These lightning rocks were just a little faster than grade 9 cultivators. Not long ago, the Royal Demon God shuttle could easily travel thousands of miles in a breath. Now, it was the other way around. However, it was impossible for her to toss these pieces of wood away. Even if Zhong Shou was willing, she wouldn't be willing. Just as she was about to mock Zhong Shou, Zhao Yinran had an idea. This is the direction to Lianyun Island. Do you want to go back and take a look? Within the shuttle, it was instantly silent. Before this, Zhong Shou wasn't the only one who heard what Prince Jia Mingluo said. Using the blood and souls of millions to seal the world region? Were those words true or false? Zhong Shou looked towards Kong Yao with a questioning gaze. There is indeed such a technique. Kong Yao was in deep thought. My Kong family has been passed down for a long time. There were also some ancient secret techniques and forbidden arts in his collection. I have seen this technique before. It is called the Great Death Restriction Formation. During the Cloud Desolate era, before the Battle of Wenshan, there were tens of thousands of grade 9 spiritual cultivators who tried to delay an alien army. Using this formation, they sacrificed themselves to seal a part of the void for 3 years. Zhong Shou's brow turned cold when he heard this, and he was enlightened. Such a Cloud Desolate era restriction was something that only an aristocratic family with 10,000 years of history like the Kong family could pass down. He definitely wouldn't be able to find it in the library in the future. He knew that the Battle of Wenshan was one of the most important battles during the 3 Saint Emperors era. The rise of the human race started from there. He knew that in that battle, corpses were strewn all over and tens of millions of experts died. However, when he heard what Kong Yao said, he was still shocked by the intensity of that battle. grade 9 cultivators. Even if they weren't the core of a sect, they weren't far away. The cloud world can't take out 10,000 grade 9 spiritual cultivators. Speaking of which, Weihai used the essence, blood, and souls of millions of people to replace them? As he said that, Zhong-shou couldn't help but exhale a mouthful of turbid air. He was in a daze and didn't know what he was thinking when he drove the shuttle over. If it was really as Prince Jia Mingluo said, then what should he do? Save people? Zhong-shou wasn't so kind. These people were pitiful, but after all, they weren't people under his rule, so what did it have to do with him? If he wanted to save them, he would have to clash with Weihai, the 3 great Taoist sects, and the various city lords. Before the night demon race even arrived, both sides would start a war. It would only cause more Huizhou people to be in danger. It would also cause the Gantian army to be in danger of being wiped out. What could he do if he went? Then, was it to confirm the effects of the great lifeless void forbidden formation? Since Prince Jia Mingluo said that, then naturally, he didn't think that this formation was problematic. Thinking about this, Zhong Shoxin was slowly at a loss. Chapter 644. They were really close to Lianyun Island. Although the Royal Demon God shuttle's speed was slow, in just 30 minutes they arrived. They floated 200,000 feet in the air and used illusionary techniques to cover, so they weren't afraid that the people below would notice. However, when Zhong-shou looked down, his expression turned serious. In the end he broke out into a laugh, that's right, only to see that at the edges of the floating islands, many heads were sliced off by the black-armored soldiers. Blood splashed onto the ground and was instantly absorbed by the spiritual formation. When the blood in the neck was dried up, the heads were tossed into the cloud ocean. There were even more cloud ships in the distance, transporting even more people from afar. What Zhong-shou didn't expect was that they weren't old or weak, but mostly strong men. Their clothes were tattered and their expressions were numb and filled with despair. There were some who wanted to fight back, but they were instantly killed by the surrounding soldiers. Squinting, Zhong-shou didn't need to think to know that the vital energy of these strong men was much stronger. To think that the city lords of Huizhou were willing to send out so much manpower. The few people in the shuttle were all used to bloody scenes. They were slightly startled before they regained their composure. Jingyin was so furious that her body trembled. Her lips turned white as she gritted her teeth. She looked at Zhong-shou with a pleading gaze. She knew that the only person who could save these people was this person. Although she didn't like this fellow, he was still different from those beasts below. Who knew that the moment Zhong-shou opened his mouth, he praised. What was that sentence again? A general should be unscrupulous. This martial Wei is truly a master of the samadhi. Zhao Yanran nodded her head. The night demons are strong, so it's understandable that Weihai would do that. Jingyin's heart turned cold. Just as she was about to get up and leave the shuttle, she heard Zhong-shou mocking himself, but for some reason, I still can't get used to it. 10 million laborers, if they were in his hands, who knew how much money he could earn every year. But Weihai had been wasted just like that. It would be fine if he could truly seal off the realm here, but he couldn't. How heartbreaking. However, the lives of tens of millions of people were pitiful. The soldiers under him and the billions of people in Donglin Cloud Continent were more important. Kong Yao wasn't surprised. She took a deep look at her husband beside her. Although this person was sinister and hateful, he was a benevolent ruler. However, she shook her head and said, "Husband, a lack of forbearance in small matters will spoil great plans. If you really don't like it, you can send a messenger to dissuade them." Even she didn't believe her own words. This move was most likely useless. Weihai would definitely not listen. They would suspect that Gantian Mountain was up to no good. Who knows, they might even go from bad to worse and chop off the heads of these tens of millions of people as soon as possible to avoid any more trouble. Now is the time for us to work together to fight against the enemy. Husband, it's best that you don't make things too tense with him. There was something that he couldn't say out loud. If he was a wise and intelligent person, he would have pretended not to see it. The bigger picture is more important. Send a messenger to dissuade them? Is one time not enough? Do we have to be humiliated by Wei Hai once more? Laughing coldly, Zhong Shou was in deep thought as he looked into the sky with a stunned expression. A moment later, he laughed. At the start, his voice was so low that it couldn't be heard. Then, his voice shook the clouds like he was crazy. Just as the girls around were a little worried. A moment later, Zhong Shou suddenly stopped. His expression was solemn as he asked Kong Yao, "If Kong Yao you command, with our 400,000 elites, how many people do we need? How much time do we need to take down the Lianyun Islands? How many deaths will there be?" These words were extremely abrupt and baffling to everyone. Kong Yao's brows furrowed. Although she didn't understand, she still said solemnly, "If we catch them off guard, at most 6 hours. The casualties would be less than half a town." Zhong Shou nodded slightly. Based on his calculations, it would also be 4 hours. The casualties would be less than 2,000. Following which he asked, "If we have 1,000,000 troops, you will command them. Will you be able to defend this island?" Kong Yao was shocked once more. What did Zhong Shou mean by that? She had never experienced a 1,000,000-man war. It hadn't been long since she was promoted to a titled governor. In the past, there were dozens of battles with 200,000 to 300,000 people. Not to mention commanding a 1,000,000-man army. Then, she thought back to Chiu Wei. The only person in Gantian Mountain who had such rights was this left pillar general. Zhong Shou asked her purely to ask and didn't have any other intentions. If it was Commander Chiu, I really don't know. However, if it was Kong Yao, I would definitely abandon this island. Zhong Shou exclaimed. Then, he heard Kong Yao continue, "This island is alone in the cloud ocean and has no place to defend and no place to retreat to. If it was Prince Jia Mingluo, just 100,000 night demons would be able to trap our 1,000,000-man army on this island. Even the navy had no way to turn the situation around. The only way was to retreat to the land and fight back. Does the ruler want to move troops from Gantian? We can't do that." Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Zhong Shou's chuckle. As expected of the invincible general that would appear decades later. This business deal was really profitable. Zhao Yanran was confused and frowned. "Zhong Shou, are you crazy? It's so weird." However, Zhong Shou suddenly stretched and said, "Since we can't reason with them, then let's not reason with them. I can't bear to see the people of Huizhou die under my knife, so I can only hang them up and save them." It was another inexplicable sentence. Zhao Yanran was surprised again. Was this guy for real? When he heard the last part, he came to a realization. Wasn't this the best excuse to occupy Huizhou Island? However, didn't this fellow look at the time? Even if he could occupy Huizhou, how would he be able to block those night demons? What big picture, what not taking small things and messing up big plans, that's all bullshit. Weihai can't block those night demons, so let me take over. The moment he said this, Kong Yao's face flushed red and she felt angry. She was thinking about Zhong Shou wholeheartedly. There was a saying in the central continent, if you marry a chicken, follow the chicken, if you marry a dog, follow the dog. The moment her father rushed over to Gantian Mountain, she had already accepted her fate. Following him along the way and giving advice, he was trying his best to think for Zhong Shou. However, this person didn't know what was good for him, forget it, she was too lazy to care about him. Zhong Shou didn't notice at all, he was still filled with pride as he scoffed. This time people will say that I am taking advantage of them and not caring about the big picture. However, it is okay. Why do I, Zhong Shou, need to reason with people? I am invincible in the world, so why should I be afraid of people pointing at me? Chaotic times are about to descend and this kind path won't work. Since that is the case, then let's just be overbearing. Hey, I should have thought about this theory earlier. Small waves can be squashed with a wave of my hand. Remember, in the future you can call me Zong Batian. In the future, in the cloud world, there was a rich person known as Nan Batian. When he did things, he was overbearing and never talked reason with others. He bullied men and women and did all sorts of evil. Zhong Shou had read the biography of this person and had always been envious of him. A real man should be like that. When he said this, the flying shuttle was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Zhong Shou was overbearing, looking at the stunned expressions of the girls. He was speechless for a long time. He impatiently kicked Zhao Yanran, who was in a daze, saying rudely, "Remember to help me send this shipwood back to Gantian. If it is missing, I will hold you responsible." After saying this, he walked out of the flying shuttle alone. Zhao Yanran woke up after a short while. Then, he touched his buttocks and was startled. She gritted her teeth and was filled with rage. This Zhong Shou actually dared to take advantage of her. He really didn't want to live. After leaving the flying shuttle, Zhong Shou took out the teleportation jade letter. He activated the spell, and the surrounding environment slowly became illusionary. Countless spaces and countless different sceneries were constantly intersecting and flashing in the vicinity. Maybe because his cultivation was much higher, this time he didn't feel like vomiting. When the scenes in front of him finally settled down, he was already in the book-hiding pavilion of the common people's vast habitat. As usual, it was cold and lonely. Zhong Shou's expression was a little dark. In front of Zhao Yanran and the others, although he was laughing and joking, scolding and joking, in his heart, he was suppressed by the night demon army in the outer region such that he couldn't breathe. Closing his eyes, Zhong Shou adjusted his emotions before heading downstairs. When he stepped down the last few steps, his face had changed into Tan Qiu's appearance. Surprisingly, Han Feng and Rulin weren't here. Zhong Shou's brows rose as he walked out of the book-hiding pavilion. Looking around, it was currently morning. Song Shengdao's disciples were mostly walking around the corridors. Looking at Zhong Shou's words, pretty much everyone was shocked and then they all bowed. At this moment, no one in the common people's vast habitat didn't know about Tan Qiu and no one disrespected him. Not only because of his frighteningly high seniority, but also because of his strong sword technique. However, when Zhong Shou's spiritual sense spread out, he was still unable to sense where Han Feng and Shi Rulin were. Were they outside of the Learning Palace? Or perhaps, which river was it in? Zhong Shou didn't hesitate, riding a sword and heading out of the palace city. Just as he was about to walk out of the city gate, a voice rang out. In the sky, a buzzing sound spread out. Zhong Shou raised his head in shock and then saw a light strike over. It circled and landed in front of him, nailing into the stone beneath his feet. It was a sword, roughly 5 feet long. It looked really normal, really ordinary. On the sword body there was a layer of green light. Zhong Shou looked around in shock and then looked up, but he didn't see anything. Although the sword was inches away from him, it didn't look like a sneak attack. Reaching out his hand, Zhong Shou pulled out the sword in confusion. Then, he was shocked. This was actually a grade 4 magical treasure. Casually waving, he didn't use much strength and a sword energy shot out. Instantly, a thin and deep mark was drawn on the ground. This sword was really sharp. Chapter 645. Good sword. Zhong Shou's eyes lit up. Although he didn't know what the spiritual formation within the sword was like and what abilities it had, just the sharpness alone was enough to make one delighted. What was more surprising was that although this item was an intermediate magical treasure, with his cultivation, he could use it freely without any obstructions. He had never had more than a year of soldiers by his side. Although he had a few spares, they weren't really suitable for him. Although the green dragon hairpin sword that Tanshio gave him was not bad, he felt that it was a little stingy. On the other hand, he liked this green sword a lot. However, where did this sword come from? At that time, his spiritual sense was spread out to search for the two of them. However, this sword suddenly appeared and he didn't know where it came from. Was it a gift from one of the Tsang Xingdao elders? Anyways, it was impossible that someone else dropped it here. He looked at the sky in deep thought. Zhong Shou focused on the sword body and looked around, but he couldn't find any seal words or markings. This sword has no name? Then let's call it nameless. Just as Zhong Shou was feeling at ease, he tied the sword to his waist. He felt the sword in his hand tremble slightly. Then, he was shocked. This nameless sword seemed to have a spirit? Like it was unhappy with the name that Zhong Shou gave it. However, moments later, it calmed down once more. Zhong Shou's eyes lit up. Was it really an artifact spirit? He had picked up a treasure. Any artifact spirit treasure, if one was willing to spend money, could grow. If one's foundations were good, they could be celestial artifacts and god artifacts. Based on what he knew, all celestial artifacts were. The first requirement was that one had spiritual sense. Most of them were evolved from magical treasures. There were many celestial artifacts passed down in the world, but no matter how good a celestial sword was, it couldn't be compared to a weapon that one developed. Who was this senior that was so generous? At this moment, Zhong Shou didn't know that at the same time, within the ancestral temple hidden in the vast habitat, a weird-looking golden long sword suddenly shone brightly, causing the entire room to be covered in a purple-gold color. A moment later, it retracted and returned to its previous state where there was no spiritual light at all. However, what changed was the purple-gold book at the top. The pages of the book were opened and flipped continuously. One of the pages suddenly moved forwards, from the 16th page to the 15th page. And then it retracted and closed. Hundreds of worlds away from the cloud world, two women who were leisurely strolling in the void also raised their brows and looked back at that world. In the end, when Zhong Shou finally found Hanfang and his disciple, they were in the world river. When Zhong Shou rushed over, he saw Shi Rulan holding a short knife and fighting with a giant golden flame wolf. Flames wrapped around its body, and its entire body was covered in golden spike. Every attack of the golden flame wolf was swift and powerful, but it was also extremely dangerous. It was just a grade 7 spirit beast. In Zhong Shou's eyes, he could destroy it with a flick of his finger. However, to Shi Rulan, it was extremely dangerous. Her petite body didn't stop to dodge and dodge. But each time, he was able to narrowly avoid the threat of death. If she wasn't careful, her brain might burst open or her stomach might be sliced open. She was actually able to fight back. The short knife in her hand slashed out many small wounds on the golden flame wolf's body. However, with the golden flame wolf's huge body, it was just like scratching an itch. Hanfang looked on from the side, his body covered in a layer of cloud-like energy. Originally, it was hard for him to see. However, he had the nine-tailed sky fox blood and the illusionary heart mirror. Illusions of this level couldn't fool him. Zhong Shou's heart jumped when he saw that. He walked over and stood beside Hanfang. Then, he couldn't help but sigh. This is too cruel. Senior brother, is this considered mistreating your disciple? Hanfang frowned when he heard this. Then, he laughed coldly. The snow lion race had to fight with those beasts at the age of 12. Rulan is already 14. Even you, Zhong Shou, at this age, weren't you chased out by Lingyun and your life and death was uncertain? My disciple can't be as successful as you, but she can't be weaker than others. Zhong Shoxin thought to himself, how can I be the same? I have decades of experience from my last life. However, what he said just now was just a joke. Looking at how Hanfang was standing there without blinking, he knew how much this senior brother valued Shi Rulan. I am just joking. Senior brother, don't be angry. Without going through such life and death battles, it would be hard for one's martial path to reach great height. When he said this, Zhong Shou was in a daze as he thought back to his past. In his last life, before he reached small success in the sword path, he spent every day in killing. Then, he came back to his senses. Why did senior brother call Zhong Shou back? Do you have something to give Zhong Shou? You are dreaming. Naturally, I called you back because of Rulin. When he said this, Hanfang was stunned. You have something on your mind. Is it because of Huizhou? Naturally, everyone in the cloud world knew about the arrival of the night demon. Zhong Shou smiled and didn't speak. Hanfang's mind was really sharp to be able to find out about such a thing. The Taishang Emperor has decided to settle the internal problems first before fighting the external problems. He is prepared to wipe out the problems in the country before dealing with the alien races. Dowling Vast Habitat also wants to preserve their strength and isn't willing to fight alone. They are prepared to leave Huizhou. Junior brother, you have to be careful. Don't get trapped here and be unable to break free. If you can't take it, you can ask the sect for help. Zhong Shou didn't care and shook his head. How would I not know about those sneaky thoughts? It isn't time for me to ask the sect for help. Isn't it just a few night demons? Zhong Shou was confident. I can flatten them with one sword. What a good one sword, how domineering! As expected from the first seat of Tsang Xingdao, the head of the 6 pinnacle swords of the cloud world. Hanfang laughed out loud and knew that Zhong Shou had other things to say, so he didn't try to persuade him anymore. His expression was filled with melancholy. 3 months later, I will leave the cloud world. My future is uncertain. You can take Rulin away. Zhong Shou was stunned before he came back to his senses and bowed. Junior brother wishes senior brother for reaching the Saint Realm. When Hanfang heard this, he shook his head. It is hard to say whether I will succeed or fail. His words were filled with bleakness. Zhong Shou didn't speak. A few months ago, Longying was the same. Spirit Realm, Celestial Realm, God Realm, Saint Realm, each realm was a huge barrier for cultivators who were on the verge of death. He had never experienced such a feeling before and couldn't comment on it. He also didn't know how to persuade him. Just as he was about to speak, Zhong Shou's brow furrowed as he looked forward. He saw that Shi Rulin was slowly being forced into a corner by the gold flame wolf and had nowhere to hide. However, at this moment, Shi Rulin's body shot up like a bow and pounced at the wolf's throat. A few spiritual patterns appeared at the center of her brows. Her actions were swift and compared to before, she didn't increase her speed by much. However, every single movement was precise and precise. Every single bone, every single muscle, there wasn't the slightest bit of excess. It was as if he had seen through the wolf's weakness. He easily broke through the giant claw's attack. Then, she broke through the wolf's energy at its weakest point. On his neck, there was a shocking bloody wound. When blood spurted out, Shi Rulin had already retreated 100 feet. It was like that knife had used up all her strength. Her body was weak, and she could only half kneel as she panted. Although the gold flame wolf was fatally injured, it was still alive. He was even more furious as he sent a palm strike towards Shi Rulin. Zhong Shou couldn't take it anymore and flicked his finger. A sword-shaped energy instantly caused the wolf's head and the front half of its body to explode into blood. Shi Rulin's eyes were originally calm and helpless. After experiencing the changes in front of her, she wasn't surprised. It wasn't until she turned around and saw Zhong Shou that her eyes lit up. She immediately pounced over and hugged Zhong Shou's waist. Zhong Shou laughed out loud and patted Shi Rulin's head. He thought to himself that this little brat's body wasn't small at all. After leaving for a few months, she didn't grow much taller. She was already 14 and had just reached his chest. However, her body was already quite big, following which Shi Rulin raised her head. Her eyes were filled with surprise and fear. "Brother Shou, do you not want me any more?" Her eyes were wet and filled with hope. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. Zhong Shou only felt that he was instantly killed by her gaze. He blamed himself. He was a beast and couldn't be forgiven. This Rulin was really lovable. How is that possible? Can you stay with me in the future? He carried her up and placed her on his shoulder. Zhong Shou took out a piece of candy from his pocket. Who knew that Sure Rulin would turn her head away in a wronged manner? Only then did Zhong Shou remember that this brat wasn't the same kid who came out from the cloud ocean. Feeling slightly awkward, Zhong Shou took out the green dragon hairpin and stuck it into Sure Rulin's hair. Only then did Sure Rulin smile. Only then did Zhong Shou look towards Hanfang, his eyes filled with a questioning intent. The lethal strike that Rulin used to kill the gold flame wolf was really weird. This is a natural ability of the snow lion race. Only the emperor race has it. Hanfang understood what he meant and explained expressionlessly. If Rulin goes all out, she can do it in 15 minutes. Increase the speed of her thinking and reaction by 100 times. However, this is just one of the simplest abilities in her bloodline. Zhong Shou was shocked. He looked at Sure Rulin, who was playing with the green dragon hairpin on his shoulder. Increase the speed of her thinking and reaction by 100 times? What would happen? That meant that the actions of others would be slowed down by 100 times in her eyes. Snow Lion of the Palm? That maniac lion Snow Seal was actually such an amazing thing? This Rulin was actually the same as him, having the monster race emperor bloodline, following which Hanfang frowned. You want me to teach her the art of war? Do you want her to lead the army? I think this girl doesn't have that kind of talent. Chapter 646. You want me to teach her the art of war, do you want her to lead the army? I think this brat doesn't have such talent. Zhong Shou's heart jumped. The current Rulin indeed didn't show any potential to be an unparalleled general. A person's talent, apart from one's own talent, was also influenced by one's environment and experience. It was tough to say that Sure Rulin under his and Hanfang's care would be better than the hell-like environment in the last life, where the strong preyed on the weak. What a person gained, they would definitely lose, following which he broke out into a laugh. If a few years ago when he found Sure Rulin, he still had some utilitarian thoughts, then at this moment, he was already treating this brat as his own sister. If she didn't succeed, then forget it. Why does Senior Master say that? No matter how useless this brat is, she should still be stronger than normal people. An unparalleled General Seed's talent wasn't just a little stronger. Hanfang's brows were tightly furrowed, not knowing what to say. After a short while, he squeezed out a sentence, she doesn't follow the rules. When Zhong Shou heard that, he was at a loss. Doesn't follow the rules? What kind of reason was that? How did she not follow the rules? She didn't follow the rules? I taught her about the art of war, talking about the phrase, 200 miles of an interesting person will become a general, 100 miles of an interesting person will be half an army. She asked me, swift like the wind, slow like the forest, invading like fire, not moving like a mountain, hard to predict like the dark, moving like thunder, what do you mean? 200 miles of an interesting person will become a general, is that a certain thing? Like he had opened up a conversation box, Hanfang said angrily, I taught her how to play chess. It said that an infantry army can travel 140 miles a day. However, she wanted to travel 160 miles. When I asked why, she said that I abandoned the heavy armor, which was why I was able to travel 160 miles. All in all. As he said that, Hanfang's words were hesitant, like he was thinking about how to phrase it. In the end, he opened his mouth. All in all, when you are talking reason with her, she will act like a hooligan. When you act like a hooligan, she will talk about rules with you. This lass is treating the art of war as child's play. Zhong Shou paused for a moment, then turned his gaze to Sure Rulin. She looked back at him and Hanfang with an innocent expression. It was as if he was trying to say that he really didn't do it on purpose. In the next moment, Zhong Shou burst out laughing. He was extremely happy. He patted Ruolan's head. This girl really didn't disappoint. Han Feng was completely confused by Zhong Shou's sudden laughter. Who knew what this fellow was happy about? He said that he wanted Zhong Shou to take Ruolan away, but when it came to parting, Han Feng was extremely reluctant. Helplessly, Zhong Shou could only stay in the vast habitat for another 10 days. Let this master and disciple be together for a little while longer. At the same time, he would deal with some random things that belonged to Tanqiu. Let those senior and junior brothers and sisters have a chance to respect him and get closer to him. When he truly left, Han Feng's expression was extremely complicated. She stuffed a large pile of things into Ruolan's hands. Pills, magical artifacts, mind stones, talismans. Some of the things within were things that even Zhong Shou was envious of. At least that heaven and earth bag was 7 times bigger than the one he was using. After saying goodbye, he also used the teleportation jade letter to return to Gantian Mountain. At this moment, Zhao Yanran had already sent his shipwood and the royal demon god shuttle back to Gantian Mountain 2 days ago. Maybe because this demon girl was already famous outside. Although the royal demon god shuttle carried heavy treasures, it was really safe and there weren't any changes along the way. It was said that after Renbo found out, he was delighted for half a day. Just these pieces of ancient wood were enough to reduce the cost of modifying the spaceship by 50%. At this moment, Zhong Shou didn't have the time to bother about this matter. He learned that Zhong Gang had already led 400,000 carefully selected infantry and cavalry to leave Rainbow City and head towards Huizhou. Zhong Shou hurriedly called Zhang Huai over and asked him a few questions. Then, without stopping, he drove the shuttle and flew towards Lianyun Island. Without the giant wood holding down the cabin, the speed of the shuttle increased once more. In just a day, Zhong Shou had already arrived in the sky above this archipelago. There weren't many changes compared to 10 days ago. The only difference was that the stench here was a little thicker. Who knows how many heads Weihai had chopped off during these 10 days. He pressed down the shuttle and flew towards the few floating islands that Weihai had pointed out that day. As expected, there were thousands of cloud ships docked here. Apart from ships transporting various resources, warships carrying soldiers. There were also 500 three-tooth warships and close to 100 five-tooth warship. There were also 10 seven-tooth and 9-tooth warships above. They were lined up in an orderly manner, numerous 6-armed and even 7-armed giant crossbows pointed outwards. The armor was firm and sharp, giving off a terrifying aura. At this moment, there were already some soldiers who came ashore and were organizing the barracks on the island. However, when Zhong Shou drove the royal demon god shuttle and landed on the deck of a 9-tooth giant ship, Zhong Shou's expression changed. He saw that Zhong Gang and the others who were welcoming him had extremely ugly expressions. They were dark and gloomy, their eyes filled with rage. When Zhong Shou saw this, his brow furrowed. He looked around and roughly knew what was going on. He saw that the giant crossbows placed on the arrow platform were all removed. If that was the case, it was still okay. However, the spiritual formation here had all its mind stones taken out. It needed a lot of time to redraw it. Zhong Shou squinted and looked tens of miles away in the direction of the main island, only to see that there were dozens of people looking in this direction. A few of the Huizhou city lords looked at the group of warships, their faces turning green and white. Like they were shocked by Gantian Mountain's military strength, they were filled with regret. Weihai had the Taishang as his shield, so naturally, he didn't need to worry about Gantian Mountain. However, if Zhong Shou wanted to take their lives, it would be just a flick of his finger. Weihai, on the other hand, had a smile on his face as he cupped his fists towards them, as if apologizing. Kong Xian's face was cold and disdainful. Zhong Shou was delighted, returning the bow and not bothering. He turned his head and heard Zhonggang say coldly, "It is okay if they took the crossbows away. After all, they belong to the Taishang. These spiritual crossbows are precious and it is understandable that they aren't willing to give them up. As for grain and resources, we can also not care about giving them 100,000 people. However, what is the meaning of destroying the spiritual formation here?" Ling Xian added, "This Weihai is a despicable person. Does he really think that we don't know about his ulterior motives?" Zhong Yuan and Ren Tianqing both kept silent, their expressions were really solemn. Hu Zhongyuan directly bowed and hollered, "Ruler, please issue a decree to withdraw the troops from here. What does the life and death of Huizhou Island have to do with us?" The moment he said this, the others were all silent and no one agreed. Their brows were tightly furrowed and they were a little worried. Zhong Shou's eyes flashed and then he laughed. If this was a few days ago, it wouldn't be inappropriate. However, to choose when the night demon was about to attack from here at any moment, one couldn't help but think about many things. The other spiritual crossbows on the arrow platforms could be moved from the warship. The 9-armed spiritual crossbow with the highest killing strength was really tough to move. Moreover, with this spiritual formation, it was unknown whether or not it could be repaired before the night demons arrived. Even if it was completed, it would be tough to make it flawless. If he was Prince Jia Mingluo, he would definitely choose this place to break through and not other places that were more tightly guarded. To say that Weihai had ulterior motives was still too light. If he knew about this 10 days ago, he would definitely be furious. No matter how shrewd he was, he would be annoyed. However, now that he heard it, he didn't care at all and just smiled. "We can't retreat." Ren Tianqing was behind everyone. At this moment, he faced Hu Zhongyuan's murderous gaze and stepped out. "Half a day ago, General Zhong Yuan and I worked together to investigate the situation. At this moment, there are 1,000,000 night demons outside, and they are all elites comparable to the Shui family race soldiers. If we can't work together with the Taishang army, even if we can't do it alone, we will suffer heavy casualties. Even if we want to retreat, we need to have a perfect plan." Most of the people around him were experienced and prudent. When they heard this, they all nodded their heads in agreement. Only Hu Zhongyuan was so furious that his face flushed red. Zhong Shou smiled and understood what Ren Tianqing meant. If they retreated, what if Weihai didn't care and left too? What would happen then? Not only would Gantian Mountain have to fight the night demons, but they would also be blamed by the sects and countries of the cloud world. As for the perfect plan, naturally, it would be to think of a way to make these dozens of Taishang elites stay here. Once the battle started, these people wouldn't be able to leave even if they wanted to. Before he knew about the Great Death Restriction formation, he would definitely shake his head and not say anything. With Weihai's intelligence, how would he take the blame for others? Knowing about this blood sacrifice formation, Zhong Shou had some confidence. This person was unscrupulous, using tens of millions of people as a sacrifice. His plan was definitely not small and he wouldn't easily retreat. However, at this moment, he already had a plan in his heart and didn't need to do that. Since we can't retreat, then let's just stay. Hu Zhongyuan's eyes opened in rage when he heard that, but he suppressed it. Zhonggang gritted his teeth and wanted to say something, but in the end, he kept his mouth shut. His personality was actually a little more fiery than Hu Zhongyuan's. However, since he was promoted to the Right Pillar General and started to observe the entire situation of Gantian Mountain, he restrained himself a little. If it was a few years ago, he would have wanted to have an all-out battle with these Taishang troops. Taking in a deep breath, Zhonggang bowed. "Then I will arrange for spirit masters to set up the formation. This time, we have brought 60 Class 9 energy-destroying crossbows with us. We can use them here." Zhong Shou shook his head, his expression filled with deep meaning. "There is no need to waste so much effort. Since there is already a spiritual formation, let's just use it. Why do we need to set it up again? The few people around were startled when they heard that, not understanding what he meant. Following which Zhong Shou took out a wooden box and passed it to Kong Yao. Do you still remember what you said 10 days ago? Chapter 647. In the middle of the courtyard, a simple and crude altar was erected here. Cinnabar, beast blood, peachwood sword, shocking wood, all the magical artifacts that could be used were there. On the table, there were a full 6 knife coins. At this moment, Kong Rue was standing in the center of the spell altar with his hands behind his back, muttering to himself. Outside of the spell altar, his 10 spirit masters and sun god protector beasts were also muttering prayers. As for the 6 When King divination coins, they shone with a faint light. Threads of essence blood dripped to the left and right of it. It was like it had a life of its own, naturally forming a spiritual formation near the divination coins. It was weird and mysterious, affecting the spiritual energy all around, shaking up and shaking, giving out a loud ringing sound. All of a sudden, a tyrannical wave of spiritual energy exploded from the altar. Kong Rue's 4 limbs and body exploded into a blood mist. Several parts of his body had exploded without any warning. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere, leaving behind ghastly holes and wounds. Outside of the spell altar, there was a cold wind. Numerous evil spirits and beasts flew over and crazily struck the spiritual formation outside of the spell altar. Luckily, a few days ago, Zhong Shou had swept all the evil spirits near Gantian Mountain to gather the Ain flood dragons. Even the energy within the evil spirit moat was greatly damaged. At this moment, those who rushed over were all useless things. When the 10 spirit masters used their incantations to cause balls of flames to sweep out, they all retreated in a panic. However, Kong Rue's muscles were spasming. His back was bent as he coughed out a heart-wrenching lung-tearing cough. He only felt that there was something stuck in his chest that he had to spit out. When the coughing slowly stopped, balls of blood were spat out. Kong Rue was slightly distracted when he saw that. It wasn't a foreign object, but pieces of his internal organs, his heart and liver. Then, he didn't care. Or rather, such a situation was within his expectations. In divination, there were 2 taboos. Fate couldn't be changed, luck couldn't be reversed. Today, he wanted to go against the heavens to change his fate, so how could he not suffer the backlash of the heavens? This kind of injury was actually nothing much. What he had truly lost was nearly 200 years of his lifespan. Little Yao, this is all I can do for you now. You can only rely on yourself to break through the death tribulation. If this tribulation was broken, then his future would be smooth sailing. The Alcade light breaks through the armies shall shine for a lifetime. He, Kong Rue, learned this fate-defying technique precisely for this day. It was just that in the past, he had never seen an opportunity and could only wait in despair. He watched as Kong Yao's fate gradually locked in. Even if he had a special technique, he didn't even have the chance to use it. Luckily, the heavens pitied him and gave his daughter a chance to break out of this situation. Seeing it with his own eyes that day really made him unable to control himself. Speaking of which, the effects of the art of defying fate should be minimal. If they were ordinary peddlers or commoners, it would be fine. However, his daughter had appeared in the world. She would definitely command tens of thousands of troops and be invincible. As for that Zhong Shou, he was the only ruler in 17,000 years who could compare to the 3 ancient saint emperors. The Saint King had descended. Each and every action of the 2 of them, even the smallest change in their fate, would affect the situation of the world. For him to want to change their fate was like an ant trying to move the body of an elephant. He opened the altar today to do what he could and leave the rest to the heavens. He only wanted to be at ease. He didn't expect it to have much effect. Kong Rue sighed and was about to put away the 6 king when divination coins. However, he was suddenly shocked. A warning sign rose up in his mind. For some reason, his heart rose up and down, unable to suppress it. Oh? This is? Looking up at the sky, Kong Rui saw the 7 stars in the northern sky that were connected together like a wooden dipper. His eyes were focused on the end of the handle. The alcade light breaks through the armies. At this moment, it was giving off a bright light, shining in the night sky. It caused the surrounding stars to become dark and colorless. So quickly, it has already started, Kong Rui muttered, following which his lips curled up. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was like he was crazy, shaking several miles. The residence that Zhang Huai chose for him was at the waist of Gantian Mountain. There were countless nobles and wealthy merchants living in this place. Many people knew his identity and also knew about Kong Yao. However, most of the people here didn't fear him, instantly scolding him. Is this country father-in-law crazy? What are you laughing at? It is just past 5 p.m., the sky isn't bright yet and this fellow woke me up. What are you laughing at? It's so noisy. When I get back, I will definitely go to the council hall to complain and submit a motion. Before dawn, I definitely won't laugh and disturb people's dreams. Kong Rui was still laughing, becoming happier and happier. How would these people know the joy in his heart? Alcade light breaks through the armies. His Yao name would shock this world from today onwards. Blood energy surged in his chest, unable to be suppressed. However, Kong Rui knew that great joy and sorrow hurt the body, especially at this moment when his essence energy was greatly damaged. After venting for a while, Kong Rui stopped his maniacal laughter. He placed his hands behind his back and was about to walk into the room. At this moment, he just needed to wait for news from Huizhou. Only when he was about to walk out of the spell altar did he come back to his senses. He really lost his mind. He actually nearly forgot about such an important matter. He walked back to the front of the wooden table and took out a translucent jade stone that looked like pigeon blood. This stone was unique to a remote place in the central cloud continent. Not only did it look good, but its name was also really beautiful. It was called the marriage stone. Legend had it that at that place, when people married, they would place the marriage stone under the dowry so that the marriage could last for a long time. Naturally, most of these legends were unfounded and untrue. However, this stone had a different meaning in the hands of an arcane master like him. As there were too many people's thoughts placed on it, this stone had a special ability that other items didn't have. A line of small seal script carved Kong Yao's birth characters. On the other side, a similar line was carved. At this moment, if Hu Zhongyuan and Ling Feikong were here, they would be shocked. What was recorded on the marriage stone was Zhong Shou's birth date. Placing this pigeon blood-like jade stone into the altar, Kong Rui gave out a self-mocking laugh. He thought back to the meeting with Zhong Shou. Although his daughter married this ruler, he didn't seem to care about her. Could even be said that he ignored her. He remembered that in the past, he focused on the divination path to stand out from the people of the race and stand out. Then, he wanted to use this technique to protect the lives of his wife and daughter. However, he didn't expect that there would be a day where he would have to use this divination method to ensure that his daughter was loved. He really didn't have any morals. However, when he thought back to the situation that day, his face was filled with worry. He didn't hesitate and cut open the veins on his wrist. Yao was lonely. As a father, he was buried in books every day and didn't have time to accompany her. How could he bear to see her being ignored by her husband for the latter half of her life? That monster king was good at everything. He was open-minded and benevolent. He was a saint ruler who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. However, this was the only thing that made him extremely dissatisfied. Even if this bloodline technique was close to the evil path, he couldn't care less. When the Alcade army breaking star slowly shone brightly. In Huangjing City, there was also a person who walked out from a 9-story tower and looked at the stars in the sky. Alcade? The army-breaking star is shining, a general star is born. Due to the different regions, the astronomical phenomena seen were naturally different as well. Kong Rue, who was in Gantian Mountain, saw the eye-catching starlight that pretty much covered the night sky. However, in Zhongshuan's eyes, the army-breaking star only gave off a slight glow, exceeding the surrounding stars. He was also unable to grasp the specific location of the sign. However, there was a thought in his heart that he definitely knew this person. Speaking of which, there was indeed one person who had some connection with the army-breaking star. It was the female general of the Kong family. Her fate actually resonated with the Alcade realm. What a surprise! Unfortunately, this woman had a bad fate and had a death sign. He originally thought that with the help of the Emperor, he might be able to change her fate. Who knew that in the end, she would drag down the fate of the Taishan country. When used on the battlefield, this woman didn't have any outstanding ability. Marrying her to Gantian Mountain was the best way to deal with it. Observing the phenomenon carefully, Zhongshuan vaguely felt that there seemed to be a sharp and peerless sword cutting through the layers of thorns, trying to break out of the trap. A sharp intent charged right into his heart. What a heavy vengeful energy! What a thick killing intent! Zhongshuan was shocked and then shook his head in confusion. Recently, the Taishang area was really peaceful and there were no wars. There shouldn't be any famous generals who had a chance to stand out. However, if there were people he knew, they would only be the generals within the Taishang country. However, looking at the signs, it was mostly bad for the fate of the Taishang country and showed signs of becoming enemies. Was it the aristocratic families in the country? His eyes squinted. As the Grand Teacher, his fate was connected to the Taishang, which was why his senses were the most obvious. If that was the case, then it would be a huge crime and also a bad sign. He couldn't figure it out, so he temporarily tossed this matter aside and didn't bother about it. Today, he stopped to cultivate and left the tower not because of the signs but because of something else. Walking out of this majestic temple, Zhongshuan boarded a carriage that was prepared long ago. Not long later, the carriage made by the prince entered the deep palace without any obstructions. When Zhongshuan stepped into the warm room that he was really familiar with, Zhongshuan looked up. He saw Yuanshan Emperor Yin, who was sitting above, raise his head and look over with a dark gaze. Seeing Zhongshuan enter, he asked right away, "That Weihai surrendered to me and said that a general is outside and can't follow orders from the ruler. He has a 70% chance of winning Lianyun Island and isn't willing to leave easily." As he said that, Yin laughed coldly. This person is really bold. Using the blood of 10 million people to set up the Great Death Restriction Formation. I wonder if this plan is feasible in Imperial Tutor's opinion? Chapter 648. This person is really bold. Using the blood of 10 million people to set up the Great Death Restriction Formation. Grand Teacher, do you think this plan is feasible? Great Lifeless Forbidden Formation? Zhongshuan's brow rose up like he was shocked. Then, he burst out laughing. It must have been given by Kong Xian. Who knew that the Kong family had such a secret technique? Looking at Yin Yu's expression, Zhongshuan knew that he had guessed correctly. Then, he shook his head. These two people, Weihai is greedy and wants to bring glory to his family. Kong Xian learned a strategy but was restricted by Kong Yao and couldn't use it. At this moment, he also wants to gain merit and suppress his cousin. With the two of them together, it is no wonder that would happen. However, the current situation isn't like 17,000 years ago. Yin Yu's eyelids closed when he heard that. Zhongshuan's words meant that he didn't agree. He felt the same way. Since there was a precedent, how could the night demon race not be wary? Taking the blood of 10 million people and causing such a huge commotion, how could the night demon race not be alerted? Then, Zhongshuan changed the topic and chuckled. However, there is no harm in trying. Wei Hai was blessed with good fortune and was a person with great achievement. After all, the method he uses is the ancient blood sacrifice formation. Even if he doesn't succeed, he can cause them to suffer heavy injuries. If he succeeds, our Taishang will expand thousands of miles. If he fails, we will be able to retreat safely. As he said that, Zhongshuan bowed slightly. This will depend on your Majesty's intentions. My intentions? Inu hesitated when he heard that. A moment later, he laughed coldly. Then let him try. However, no matter if he succeeds or not, we have to teach him a lesson. How audacious! When a general is outside, the ruler's orders can't be taken. Although this sentence was the correct path of war, the ruler wouldn't be happy when he heard it. If everyone was like that, the country wouldn't be a country and the ruler's power would fall. Although he knew that Wei Hai didn't have any other thoughts, he couldn't punish him as a warning to others. As for the 10 million people in Huizhou, he didn't care at all. Not to mention these people, they were still citizens of other countries. Even if it was the Taishang, if he was able to use these sacrifices to defeat the Xenorace, then he would be willing to do so as well. If there was a subject who had to bear the evil reputation, as long as he was severely punished afterwards, he would still be a saint in the eyes of the people. Hearing this, Zhong Xian also stood up with a smile, but when he looked at Inu again, he was suddenly stunned. An undetectable gray aura suddenly appeared between Inu's eyebrows. He couldn't help but be startled. What was the reason? This should have nothing to do with Inu himself. Although it was not an ominous omen, it would certainly affect the Taishang's position. But what was the reason? Could it be because of what he said just now? Crash! A pair of ivory chopsticks suddenly fell on the ceramic tiles. It was also in the imperial capital, not far from the imperial palace. Kong Li looked at the ground below in a slight daze. This sudden turn of events also alarmed the members of the Kong clan who were eating in the room. They all looked over in astonishment. Kong Li didn't bother about them. He only felt his heart jump and was filled with terror. "Father, are you feeling unwell?" Kong Su sat at the side with his identity as the son. At this moment, his eyes were filled with curiosity as he asked. He knew that his father's cultivation had actually broken through to peak grade 9. He was just a step away from the spirit realm. At such a realm, he should be immune to all diseases. At this moment, he had already reconnected his broken arm and couldn't fight with others. He could only barely move about. In his eyes, the one who dropped the chopsticks should be him and not his father who had such a high cultivation. Kong Li's face was ashen white. All of a sudden, he didn't know what to say to the people in the room. This was a bloodline warning, a sign of danger. Moreover, it was extremely dangerous. "Are you worried about third brother?" Kong Su smiled. "Father, didn't you say that if I didn't have that bitch dragging me down, I would definitely be able to charge into the heavens and step into the clouds? Even if I became a commander, it wouldn't be impossible. I would be able to protect the safety of our entire race." The few uncles also said the same. Kong Li was startled. He had indeed said that before. However, now he felt that there was definitely something wrong with all of this. "I must have missed something." He rushed out of the house like a madman. Kong Li raised his head to look at the starry sky. Then, his eyes were filled with confusion. There was nothing unusual in the sky. When he glanced at the light-shaking star in the north, he found that it was still as calm as ever. Looking at it now, it seemed a little dimmer. For some reason, Kong Li immediately relaxed. He couldn't help but feel mocking in his heart. How could that bitch have a chance to turn things around? He was certain that this woman's life was going to be a disaster and she would most likely die early. There was no mistake about it. It was a pity for his younger brother. With his talent in algebra, if he could stay in the Kong family, he would definitely be able to contend against Zhong Xian one day. Had he lost his composure? How could he be so flustered? But where did this omen come from? Could it be King Liao? Was it the Yang family? Speaking of which, recently, due to Gantian Mountain sending envoys to question him, many powers in the imperial court were working together to cause problems. The two families weren't having a good time recently. It was currently dawn and the starry sky was slowly dimming. The sun rose up in the horizon and rays of sunlight shone down. Kong Li just stood there in the courtyard, staring blankly into space as he sank into deep thought. Do you still remember what you said 10 days ago? The other people on the nine-toothed giant boat didn't pay much attention. Only Kong Yao, who received the wooden box, was slightly stunned. Zhong Shou didn't call her concubine Yao but Qing. It wasn't her husband calling her concubine but a ruler addressing his subjects. What did that mean? Who knows if it was an illusion, but she felt that the wooden box in her hand was extremely heavy. When she received it, she nearly couldn't hold on to it. He had no idea what was in it. As for what she said on the flying shuttle 10 days ago, of course I remember. It is good that you remember. Zhong Shou smiled, following which his expression turned solemn. From today on, the left and right pillar generals will be removed and the Privy Court and 5 Army Inspection Division will be set up. The Privy Court will be responsible for moving troops, making plans, military law, and managing the promotion and demotion of Grade 3 and below officials. The 5 Army Inspection Division will be responsible for training troops, managing troops, and commanding troops during war. General Chiu Wei has great achievements and can be promoted to Country Protecting Duke, the first head envoy of the Privy Court. Zhong Gang will make West Marquis the Right Army Inspection Division. Everyone's expression turned solemn when they heard that, bowing respectfully as they listened to the orders. At this moment, when they heard Zhong Shou's words, they didn't feel surprised. The left and right pillar generals were set up by Zhong Weiran to manage the troop. In the past, when Gantian country was small, it was okay. Now, they had already unified Donglin. These two positions had a lot of power and had a lot of work to do. When Zhong Shou was there, it was still okay. However, if it was another ruler, Zhong Gang and Chiu Wei wouldn't be the pillar general. If they had any thoughts of betrayal, it would shake the foundations of the country. Similar to the civil servants of the 6 ministries, removing these two positions and replacing them with military officials was something that everyone had been looking forward to for a long time. Even Zhong Gang himself was prepared and knew that his position as the right pillar general wouldn't last long. When he heard that, not only was he not shocked, but he was happy instead. During these few days, he had been annoyed by those complicated military matters. When everyone heard that, they were startled. Chiu Wei being the Privy Court head envoy was what everyone wanted. In Gantian Mountain, only he had the right to protect the country. This pillar Chiu really had the ability to protect the country. However, Zhong Gang's appointment was surprising. Since there was a right, then there was definitely a left. The 5 Army Inspection Division would definitely be split into the middle, left, right, front, and back. The middle army should be the most important and the head of all the inspectors. Zhong Gang wasn't a talented general and was appointed as the right army inspector. It was because of his experience and military merits as well as his loyalty. But who was this inspector of the middle army? Hu Qianxiu or Chai Yuan? Zhong Yuan had the ability and had a huge reputation in Gantian Mountain. However, his experience was a little lacking. Zhong Gang himself didn't care much about it. As long as he could lead the army, it was okay. However, he was also curious as to who exactly was the person who could suppress him. Or could it be that the left and middle army inspectors were vacant? However, everyone felt that Samuraim's gaze wasn't right. He was smiling as he looked at Kong Yao's jade hands. This ruler was really perverted. What was there to look at about a pair of hands? Everyone felt disdain in their hearts. However, they had an idea. Their eyes followed Samuraim's gaze and looked over. Kong Yao's expression changed as she looked at her hands in disbelief. Frowning, Kong Yao opened this expensive red wooden box. She saw that there were only two things within. One was a rolled-up imperial decree and the other was a purple gold seal. At this moment, everyone's expressions were slightly weird. Kong Yao's hands trembled as she picked up the golden seal. When he flipped it open, he saw the words Left Army Inspector in front of the palace engraved in gold. She used her true chi to draw and move. Looking closely, it was an official decree. It was full of praises for her. Kong Yao didn't care about all this. These formulaic sentences had no meaning and couldn't be treated as real. What made her lose her focus were the last two sentences. Today, Kong Yao will be the Left Army Inspector in charge of the palace. The date at the bottom was 10 days ago. It should be that Zhong Shou had already prepared it when he first came to Lianyun Island. Speaking of which, at that time, Zhong Shou had already asked her to be the Left Army? Gantian Mountain now had 400 towns. If they were split into 5, they would have 800,000 troops, all of them elites. She was stunned for a moment. Then, Kong Yao looked at Zhong Shou in disbelief. Everything that happened today was like a dream. She didn't expect that she would have a chance to lead an army. She suddenly thought back to not long ago at the peak of Gantian Mountain. The words that Xian Yuan Iran said to her, "My husband once told me that Sister Kong's ability to lead troops might not be as good as Zhong Yuan and Pillar Qiu's, but you are a commander and can take charge of an area." Zhong Yuan could lead troops, but Sister Kong could lead generals. Kong Yao's abilities could only be displayed when she commanded an army of thousands of men and horses. She originally thought that it was a joke. Only now did she know that Zhong Shou really saw it that way. Chapter 649. At this moment, Kong Yao's emotions were surging, and an indescribable feeling arose. When it finally settled down, there was only one thought in her mind: a soldier would die for someone who understands him. If he treats me like a country soldier, I will repay him like a country soldier. However, moments later, Kong Yao's heart turned cold. She thought back to the various methods that Zhong Shou used on her. So that was the case, it wasn't because of her beauty. From start to finish, it was to dig her over to Gantian Mountain. Logically speaking, she should feel honored that someone valued her talents so much. However, why did she feel that this fellow was so hateful, making her grit her teeth? When Ling Xian and the others saw that the words carved on the golden seal weren't Central Army Inspector, but Left Army, their hearts instantly relaxed. However, their hearts tightened. The left was an honorable position. This position was even higher than Zonggang's Right Army Inspector. They couldn't help but look at Kong Yao with weird gazes. Kong Yao didn't care at all, expressionlessly taking it all in. She kept the golden seal decree in her hands into the wooden box. She coldly asked Zhong Shou, listening to what ruler is saying, "Do you want me to command this battle?" Zhong Shou was delighted. This time she didn't say the words concubine and husband. He tilted his head and looked at Kong Yao with interest. Facing that cold gaze, he felt some fear in his heart. "That's right. Today you will be the commander." Just as he said that, Zhong Shou heard someone holler from the side, "I am not willing to accept this." Turning around when he heard that, as expected, it was Hu Zhongyuan. At this moment, he straightened his neck, his face flushed red. "This woman has no contributions to our Gantian Mountain. How can she be the Left Army Inspector? This matter is too preposterous. Hu Zhongyuan feels injustice for the generals of Gantian Mountain." Zhong Shou swept everyone. Although he didn't speak, his brows were tightly furrowed. He had expected such a situation. "Kong Yao is my concubine." Hearing this, Hu Zhongyuan was startled. He did not know what he meant, but Zhong Shou laughed and said, "What's wrong with Dai Gu commanding the army? If you say it's absurd, then let's be absurd for once. I insist on doing so. What can you do?" Hu Zhongyuan held his breath and thought to himself, how can this be? However, he tactfully kept his mouth shut. He knew that once this Zhong Shou became unreasonable, even 10 horses would not be able to pull him back. Kong Yao didn't pay attention to Hu Zhongyuan's words. She fixed her eyes on Zhong Shou. If I lead the army, then you can't interfere and just watch from the side. It doesn't matter. Zhong Shou answered without hesitation. He was happy to do so. Everyone's eyes narrowed. They all knew that the monarch's ability to lead troops was above Zhong Yuan's. I am afraid that my prestige will not be established. Ruler, please give me the power to kill generals. Zhong Shou hesitated. Would this woman find an excuse to kill all his generals for revenge? In the end, he took out a sword and tossed it over. He couldn't bear to part with the nameless sword. This was another backup sword, but it was also sharp enough to be used as an imperial sword. It was barely qualified to be used as an imperial sword. This sword can kill generals below grade 3. She specially pointed at Hu Zhongyuan. If this fellow doesn't listen, you can decide his life and death. Hu Zhongyuan's face instantly turned bitter. He was now a secondary grade 3. He couldn't help but touch his neck. His body felt cold. Was he really going to make an example out of himself? Was he going to kill the chicken to warn the monkey? Or was the ruler going to cut off the wings of the Iron Tiger race? He instantly decided to be more well-behaved. He could only curse out in his heart. Who knows what this woman used to charm the ruler to such an extent? He was totally confused. Everyone was silent. Although this sword could only kill grade 3 and below. However, Zhong Shou's attitude was already revealed. His words were also filled with warning intent. Kong Yao's eyes flashed and then she bowed deeply. Yes, ruler. Her voice turned serious. Ruler wants to attack the intent of the Taishang? When she said that, the deck was totally silent. Zhong Shou's gaze suddenly turned cold as he looked opposite. Suddenly, he flew up and took a few steps in the direction of the opposite main island. At the start, no one cared. However, when Zhong Shou took a second step, a sword intent rose up and charged into heaven and earth. With each step he took, the sword intent would increase by a little. Taking 10 steps forward, that extremely strong and sharp mental intent was already suppressing 10,000 miles. Who knows if this Gantian mountain monster king will choose to leave or stay? On the main island, Wei Hai was looking at the huge fleet with great interest. He was also shocked. He had long heard that the Gantian army was strong and could sweep a continent and wipe out spiritual houses and sections. However, he didn't think much of it and felt that Gantian Mountain was lucky to obtain the legacy of Wulye country, which was why they had such strength. Apart from the Blood Cloud cavalry, what kind of strong army could that barbaric land have? Only today did he know that the navy of this country was actually so strong. On those 3 nine-toothed giant ships, there were many strong crossbows, making one feel terrified. He had underestimated the Gantian mountain monster king. He dares. Kong Xian's tone was still filled with disdain. Although this battle is important to our Taishang, it won't hurt our foundations. However, to our Gantian mountain, it concerns life and death. If that person is smart, he should swallow his anger. Following which they found it weird. What was that side doing? From afar, Zhong Shou passed a red wooden box into the hands of his cousin. The atmosphere on the ship suddenly changed. It was blurry, one couldn't see clearly and couldn't hear anything. One could only make out a few sentences through lip reading. What Imperial Inspector, Left Army Inspector, and so on. What kind of position was that? Seeing those people being so respectful, it should be an important position. Didn't Kong Yao already become the Monster King's concubine, so why was she able to hold an official seal? Trying to act mysterious. In the end, he scoffed coldly. Kong Xian cupped his fists towards Wei Hai. There is no need to bother about these people. As for this great death restriction formation, we have only gathered 2 million. I think that we should be quick. Wei Hai nodded his head slightly. He also felt the same way. With the Taishang as his shield, no matter how unhappy the Monster King was, he wouldn't be able to cause any waves. Even if he was the ruler of a country in front of him, he would be able to do whatever he wanted. What head of the 6 pinnacle swords, invincible in the cloud world? If he didn't have enough reason, he wouldn't be able to go around the Taishang ruler and add a finger to his body. Taishang was the rightful ruler of the mid-plains. The country was prosperous. Who would dare to offend them? Moreover, a general like him in Taishang had the ability to go up against spirit realm experts. If he didn't have worries in his heart, he would have wanted to test whether or not this monster Kenzo sect protector had the ability to be invincible in the cloud world. Speaking of which, this great death restriction formation really needed to be solved as soon as possible. He turned his eyes and stared at the few people beside him. These city lords, who had extraordinary statuses and extraordinary martial strength, were all drenched in cold sweat. All of them bowed. "Don't worry, Commander Wei, we have gathered most of them, they are all below 30. In these few days we will be able to transport them over. This matter concerns our survival, so how would we dare to take it lightly?" Only then did Wei Hai's expression relax, following which he laughed out loud. He waved his sleeves and was about to return to his tent. However, at that moment, a crisp sword ring suddenly rang out in the air. Following that, an incomparably domineering sword intent suddenly shot up and pierced through this space. Wei Hai was shocked, turning his head only to see Zhong Shou walking over from the distance. The sword pressure grew stronger and stronger, covering thousands of miles of the Lianyun archipelago. Wei Hai's expression froze, although he could barely go up against this strong sword intent. However, the faces of the people nearby were all ashen white. Even Kong Xian, who was filled with disdain towards Zhong Shou, was devoid of blood. Only now did he know that Zhong Shou's reputation of being invincible in the cloud world wasn't just for show. Wei Hai's eyes squinted, following which he calmly stood with his hands behind his back. He was only guessing in his heart, why did this person come? Why was he doing this? Was he just showing off to him? Zhong Shou's body finally stopped 100 miles away from the main island, looking over from afar. His sword intent was as strong as before, filled with killing intent. He smiled. "I heard that your army has chopped off many heads and captured many elite. This manpower is hard to come by. My Donglin has been in chaos these few years, and there aren't many of them. If you don't care, why not give them all to me? 10 million people could provide for 200,000 elite. At the peak of the spiritual wave, there could be at least 100 to 200,000 grade 4 experts." In his heart, he felt heart-pained. To unify the cloud continent and conquer other worlds, every bit of manpower was precious. Following which, without waiting for him to react, Zhong Shou continued, "To fight the night demons, there has to be a hierarchy. You are just a general in the Taishang, your position is low. Why not hand over all your military power to me?" His eyes were focused on Wei Hai as long as he agreed. Even if he agreed on the surface but went against him on the inside, there would be some leeway between the two sides. What was important was the last sentence. Those Huizhou people who were captured were just along the way. He had to get the military power here. At this moment, his voice spread out into the distance. Those people who were being escorted and kneeling at the edges of the floating island all heard it. Instantly, their eyes lit up and were filled with anticipation. Wei Hai was startled and found it weird. A lord who could unify Donglin actually cared about the lives of these people. That was unbelievable. When he heard the last part, his pupils constricted. He instinctively understood that the latter was the most important part. Is Jun Shang joking? Your Gantian is just a barbaric country. Even if you are a ruler, you can only kneel and talk to my emperor. You actually dare to open your mouth and ask to command my Taishang troops? Scoffing coldly, Wei Hai clenched his fist. Without needing him to indicate anything, The 9-armed spiritual crossbows on the arrow platforms all turned around and pointed over. He didn't fear Zhong Shou's overwhelming aura as he stepped forwards. The ground began to tremble. Weihai raised his head and looked right at Zhong Shou. Let's pretend that I didn't hear ruler say those words. As for those strong men, they are the people of Huizhou and have nothing to do with me. If monarch wants it, you can just ask them. Chapter 651. Shang Country? Barbarian? Zhong Shou laughed when he heard that. It seemed like they couldn't negotiate. However, he still looked at the few people beside Weihai with some hope. What do you all think? My temper isn't good and I don't like to be rejected. Although Gantian Mountain is small, I can still wipe out a country. Zhong Shou is only grade 9, but he can decide the life and death of people. You can hand over your military power and let me take charge. All of you can wait peacefully and you will be fine. The expressions of the few Huizhou city lords instantly changed. They could hear the obvious threat in Zhong Shou's words. Wipe out a country and decide the life and death of people. This was an undisguised and blatant threat. They wanted to reject, but they didn't dare to say anything. Such a suppressive aura wasn't a joke. Before this, they could follow Weihai to mock Zhong Shou. However, when he was in front of them, they realized that it was so tough to even reject him. However, the eyes of the demon king in front of them were as cold as knives. It was as if they said no, they would be killed on the spot. They knew that they were isolated within the spiritual formation and there were hundreds of thousands of troops around. However, their hearts still trembled. They suddenly heard Weihai scoff coldly. Only then did they remember that there was such an unreasonable Taishang chief commander beside them. A Taoist at the side smiled and cupped his hands. I am Xiantong Zhong Handu, greetings. Although we are outsiders, we feel that the ruler's words today are a little too much. As for how to proceed, in my opinion, we should let these few people decide. The expressions of those few people instantly relaxed. Weihai couldn't guarantee their safety, but Handu could. Xiantong, Lingming, and Luotian sects were all large factions in the world. Although they weren't able to occupy a spiritual house, their strength wasn't below. Even if they weren't strong enough to be enemies with Gantian Mountain, they still had a Dowling vast habitat behind them. Since Handu spoke, he should be able to ensure their safety. Thus, they all rejected him. Actually, there is nothing wrong with monarch being in charge of the military. However, since the officials of Shangguan are here, we can only rest assured if the Taishang is in charge of the battle. These able-bodied men have other uses. Even if we don't want it, there is no reason to give it to Gantian Mountain. Exactly. Isn't Jun Shang's words too much? Although our country is small and the people are few, we are like ants in front of the emperor, but we are not people who can be bullied by others. Zhong Shou narrowed his eyes and glanced at the three Taoists, then looked at the distant horizon. It seemed like Dowling Vast Habitat wanted to take a gamble with Weihai. Indeed, a foundation that had lasted for 10,000 years could not be easily abandoned. Are you guys facing the great lifeless forbidden formation? When these words were spoken, Weihai and the others were slightly startled. They looked at Zhong Shou with incomparable astonishment. He did not expect Zhong Shou to know about this formation. Kong Xian's lips curled up in a mocking manner as he looked at the nine-toothed giant ship. With that bitch there, how could he not know? Zhong Shou was still expressionless. If I say that this formation is useless, do you all believe it? The few of them were startled. However, moments later, Weihai scoffed. If you haven't used it, how do you know that it is useless? Jun Shang, you couldn't have gone to the night demons to inform them, right? As for the other people, the faces of the few city lords fluctuated between green and white. They didn't know whether or not Zhong Shou's words were true. However, when they saw Weihai act like that, they calmed down. The three Taoists were really expressionless and didn't care at all. Samuraim's eyes constricted and he knew what they meant. Even if it was useless, they had to try. As the saying goes, if the ruler sees the people as grass, then the people will see the ruler as an enemy. Since you all are city lords, you don't want to protect the people under you. Instead, you let them do whatever they want. Using the blood of the people to protect the rights in your hands, don't you feel ashamed? The moment he said this, the few people opposite him all looked over with weird expressions. Zhong Shoxin sighed and knew that these people wouldn't listen at all. His way of thinking was indeed incompatible with this era. Even after the God King came into being, it took 10,000 years for the commoners to gain some status in this world. Even he himself didn't care much about these ants. What he did today was because Wei Hai and the others were useless. His plan was to let these people lead the battle in the worst possible direction. Why not take control of the situation in his hands from the start? Speaking of which, since things had reached such a stage, why was he still talking nonsense with these people? At this moment, the hope in the eyes of those elites who were tied up and kneeling at the edge of the floating island slowly faded and despair appeared once more. However, in the next moment, he heard Zhong Shou laugh. Forget it. Since you all want to go against the flow and kill the innocent, then today, I will represent the heavens to suppress the Tao. Since you all can't protect Huizhou, then I will protect it. If you all don't care about the people on this island, then I will pity them. When he said these words, his tone was flat but it was filled with determination. A killing intent charged into the clouds. Zhong Shou's waist instantly reacted. Wuming Jian cried out, not waiting for its master's orders. It broke out of its shell and left. Zhong Shoxin was slightly shocked and then he laughed. This sword actually had a spirit within. You can't take it anymore? You want to fight with someone? Very good. Holding the sword handle, Zhong Shou's body suddenly rose into the air. He flew 10,000 feet up like he was flying into the east of Lianyun, into the rising sun. Then, he slashed down with his sword. Let me try and see if the formation you all are relying on is really unbreakable. Before his voice landed, there was a loud explosion. Dozens of layers of spiritual light barriers appeared in the sky above Lianyun Island. However, that sharp sword glow was like a hot knife through butter, breaking through 3 layers. It still didn't stop as it continued to slash down. Wei Hai's pupils constricted and then he laughed coldly. He really attacked? This Gantian mountain ruler really didn't know his place. Since he wanted to die, then he would fulfill his wish. Today, Zhong Shou was the one who started the fight, so if he killed him here, no one in the imperial court would have anything to say. He waved his sleeves and said flatly, anyone who dares to offend my Taishang army will be killed. As soon as the word pardon was spoken, the thousands of crossbows on the archery platforms around the main island buzzed simultaneously. Numerous crossbow bolts surged over. They pretty much drowned out Zhong Shou's body in midair. The surrounding 100,000 feet of land was swept and destroyed countless times by the various Tao techniques contained within the crossbow arrows. However, when the spiritual light dissipated and Wei Hai scoffed coldly, Zhong Shou was still standing perfectly fine in the sky. Millions of sword shadows fell down like raindrops. Pretty much each strike landed on the weakest part of the island, protecting spiritual formation. Bit by bit, it caused the spiritual light barriers to collapse. In an instant, it broke 4 times. Have you all heard about the battle at Mysterious Cloud Spirit Sect? Then, you should know where my true body is. You can try to see if the Great Death Restriction formation that you all laid out can stop me? The black and white holes could twist space and time. However, before, when he was at Mysterious Cloud Spirit Sect, Zhong Shou only had rough control. At this moment, he had the Book of Eon Extreme Life in his hands and also obtained a portion of the Book of Universe Essence. When he used it now, it gave off a totally different aura from before. Each sword brought with it some time and space laws. Li Wuhui's blade could compare to the speed of time, and was said to be able to slice through time. However, his sword might be above that. However, these changes were hidden in the instant space dragon sword of the 9-9 long ing sword. The feeling that it gave one was that it was unusually quick. At this moment, Zhong Shou's true body was in the space layer outside of the cloud world. The illusionary image within the cloud world was constantly changing between real and illusionary. At this moment, if there was anything that could counter this ability of his, apart from people stronger than Zhong Shou, there was only that great death restriction formation. Weihai's face couldn't help but turn ashen white. The sword's shadow flew down like a descending dragon. Behind Zhong Shou, the long ing sword roared. Another layer of barrier was easily broken. This wasn't the ability of a peak heaven realm. Even a spirit realm cultivator couldn't do so. He clenched his fists tightly and gave out a cracking sound. Before this, he was able to face Zhong Shou head-on without fear. However, when he saw the heaven-covering sword shadow, his aura stopped. No matter how he knew, he didn't feel that he could win and block these dragon-like sword lights. It was also at this moment that a boom sound was suddenly transmitted over. Weihai turned his head in shock and saw the east. That giant squadron had spread out. Millions of giant crossbows fired at the same time and started to strike the spiritual formation of the main island. Along with Zhong Shou in the air, several layers of spiritual light barriers were forcefully blown apart. Thousands of blood cavalry formed up dozens of miles away. They were like sharp arrows, and there were close to 5,000 of them. Each of them held a halberd. In that direction they were eyeing aggressively. Blood Cloud Cavalry. Weihai frowned. The number of Blood Cloud Cavalry that shocked the world was much more than what he knew. He didn't hesitate to wave his sleeves. Send my orders to the arrow towers to attack the navy first. The troops in the west need to be wary of that Blood Cloud Cavalry. Even if 1,000,000 people attacked the spiritual formation on the main island, they would need to spend some time. The only thing to worry about was the giant crossbows on the cloud ships. Their destructive power was shocking. Next would be the Snow Cloud Cavalry that was said to have the ability to kill celestial realm cultivators. However, not long after the order was sent out, Weihai felt that the situation wasn't right. The direction that the cloud ships chose to attack was the blind spot of most of the arrow towers. The few that could enter their firing range were mostly restricted by the Blood Cloud Cavalry and couldn't fire. However, that Blood Cloud Cavalry was still dozens of miles away, where the crossbows couldn't reach. Weihai was first startled. Then, he clenched his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. Originally, his arrangements didn't have such a flaw. However, not long ago, he gave up the few floating islands which resulted in such a huge flaw. Who knew that today he would be caught in his own trap? His eyes turned red as he looked at Zhong Shou above. Weihai turned his head abruptly. Can we use that great lifeless imprisonment formation? Chapter 652. Can that great lifeless restriction formation be used now? Kong Xian, who was at the side, was slightly shocked. He only felt that Weihai's expression was really vicious, like he was about to swallow someone up. He knew that he couldn't hesitate at this moment. Kong Xian didn't think much about it. It can be used. 2,000,000 people aren't enough to deal with the Night Demon army. It is more than enough to seal this Zhong Shou alone. However, we need to prepare once more. We are also afraid that the night demons will notice. He felt some regret in his heart. If he knew that this would happen, he wouldn't have gone overboard. He had totally infuriated the Gantian Mountain Monster King. Weihai's eyes flashed when he heard this, and a hint of warmth appeared on his face. He coldly laughed. Since the demonic beast king wants us to try and see if the great lifeless void imprisonment formation can trap him, what harm is there in giving it a try? I also want to see how the ancient world restriction formation power is like. As for the night demons, if we can't pass this stage, then why would I care about them? Kong Xian wasn't surprised when he heard that. He bowed slightly before turning around and leaving. He flew back to the army camp at the center of the main island. He waved his hand and ripped open a giant tent. There was actually nothing within, only a giant jade stone altar. Kong Xian took in a deep breath and looked above. Even if he was shot by tens of thousands of arrows, he was still totally unharmed. Actually, at this moment, the best way to deal with the enemy was for someone whose strength wasn't weaker than him to go up and force him to retreat. However, Kong Xian wasn't his match and didn't dare to. Wei Hai seemed to be the same, following which, from the corner of his eyes, he saw a situation tens of miles away. He saw a woman sitting on the commander's seat of the nine-toothed giant ship. She was actually giving orders to command the ship. Looking closely, it was actually Kong Yao. That body, that aura, it was definitely his cousin. This Zhong Shou was actually using this woman as the commander to command this battle. Kong Xian was startled. He was first in disbelief. Then, he scoffed coldly, taking off his hat and stepping onto the altar with his hair in a mess. He stabbed a 1,000-year peach-wood sword into the center of the spell altar. When Kong Xian chanted, a layer of blood-red light immediately appeared in the sky above the main island of Lianyun. At this moment, there were close to 300 spirit masters around the altar. Every 3 feet around the altar, there was a person sitting there. He also chanted spiritual words to help Kong Xian activate the Great Lifeless Void Imprisonment Formation. The bloody light in the air instantly spread out. Countless Yin souls also surged up and floated in the sky. Zhong Shou's figure and his sharp sword aura were both stopped. He only felt that the weak spatial barrier here had suddenly become solid. It was becoming increasingly difficult to switch between reality and illusion. Every time he went out of the cloud world and returned to the cloud world, he had to expend a huge amount of true power. The first to be affected was the sword in his hand. His sword aura was greatly weakened. The 2 layers of spiritual barriers that he had broken through had also recovered when his aura was slightly suffocated. Furthermore, the isolating power was growing stronger and stronger. The crossbow arrows and spells that shot over were close to injuring him. This was the Great Lifeless Void Imprisonment Formation? Zhong Shou's eyes squinted and then he laughed. He wasn't someone who would blindly listen to what others said. He definitely wouldn't believe Prince Jia Mingluo's words without any doubt. The reason why he believed it was because of the future 10,000 years later. There were simply too many techniques that could be used to break the Forbidden Realm formation. That was because the Cloud World at that time had numerous heroes who were attacking the outer region. The Cloud World army had also gone through too many of such methods. 10,000 years later, it wasn't a huge matter and it wasn't a secret technique. Everyone knew about it. He recalled a portion of information in his mind. Just as the entire Cloud World barrier was about to be locked down, a ball of flame suddenly rose up around Zhong Shou's body. A pair of purple lightning wings spread out, blue flames mixed with purple lightning and instantly turned pure black. It was the lightning blaze 1,000 flash. In terms of breaking the space barrier, naturally the Lu family's sky-burning flame was the easiest to use. Adding in the lightning phoenix and purple lightning, he didn't need to fear the space-restricting formation. Wherever the black flames passed, all of the spatial spirits within a radius of 100 miles began to burn frantically. The essence blood of the 2 million people in the Great Lifeless Void Imprisonment Formation was not only useless, but it was also like an accelerant, causing the world region to become even weaker. It couldn't restrict space and also couldn't seal the world. Once again, Zhong Shou's body was able to travel freely inside and outside the barrier, twisting the space around him. Even if he was shot by 10,000-year crossbow arrows, he was totally unharmed. However, this world-sealing power could be easily dealt with. On the contrary, it was the 2 million souls that this formation forcefully captured that made one feel that it was really problematic. Samarim looked at the sky, only to see death energy surging. Numerous vengeful spirits screamed and pounced towards his body. Suddenly, he had an idea. The death energy here was really thick, however. Just a few days ago, these people were still alive, living beings. Then, the body was startled in the air like he was dead, only his eyes shone brightly. Just as Weihai's eyes shone brightly and the people of Gantian Mountain felt really anxious. Zhong Shou suddenly laughed out loud, shaking the region. At this moment, the heaven and earth words in his soul ocean had merged into the universe word. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth were slowly showing signs of merging with yin and yang. They merged together and were hard to separate from one another. Between the black and white whole Dharma, with the universe yin and yang words as the core, outside were lightning, wind, luck, stack, swallow, purify, illusion, 8 spiritual charms. At this moment, there was one more spiritual charm that suddenly formed. It was life and death, these 2 words. The life word was still okay, but the moment the death word appeared, it was at the God talisman level. Zhong Shou laughed. He really had to thank Weihai and Kong Xian. Forming the life and death talismans wasn't a tough matter for him. However, to raise this talisman to the God talisman level, it took a lot of effort. In the next instance, Zhong Shou's spiritual sense returned to reality, only to see that close to 300,000 vengeful spirits had gathered around him, wrapping around and attacking him. However, they were blocked by his sword intent, which was why they were unable to get close to his body. Being pressed down by so many souls, even if they were normal people, they would feel a lot of pressure, their bodies abnormally heavy. Zhong Shou wanted to break it open, but when he was about to use his sword, he had an idea. Speaking of which, he hadn't used that set of sword techniques in a long time. Wasn't this situation just right for him? He could also save on numerous cultivation methods. A withered color appeared on his right hand, his flesh and blood withering. His long hair broke free from the crown, turning white from top to bottom. Zhong Shou's face was a sickly jade white color, looking really devilish. 9 Spirit Gate opens, announcing your death. This was the Styx River Death Sword. Tens of thousands of death energy surged over, but they were unable to hurt Zhong Shou's body. Instead, they were restrained and guided by a pure death energy. The millions of souls stopped attacking Zhong Shou. Instead, they treated him as their comrade, the vengeful Spirit King, bowing down and listening to his orders. Behind Zhong Shou, there seemed to be a door that suddenly opened. A sinister wind blew, and even more death chi permeated the air. At this moment, Zhong Shou's sword fell from the sky once more. The sword's shadow struck out, it was a white sword glow. The spiritual energy barrier down below was almost broken in response to the sound. First layer, second layer, fourth layer, fourth layer. Countless yin spirits rushed to gather at the tip of Guard's sword. Pushing the power of the sword, all of their power was channeled into the sword. It caused the death energy on the nameless sword to become thicker and stronger. Zhong Shou was still outside the 5 layers of spiritual energy, but the death energy that spread out caused the plants on the island to wither. Everyone felt a chill down their spines, goosebumps covering their bodies. They only felt that the rising energy in their bodies was slowly disappearing. Panic had already surfaced in Wei Hai's eyes. What sword technique was this? He didn't know why it was a sword, but he felt like he was already dead. At this moment there was a loud explosion. Wei Hai turned around and looked back. He saw that the blood cloud cavalry had finally moved. A total of close to 5,000 blood-colored halberds flew out. Before this, they were just threatening from the outside, but now that they attacked, they broke several layers of the spiritual energy barrier. Along with Zhong Shou and the giant fleet, the formation on the island was instantly in danger. Wei Hai was shocked, following which a violent intent appeared in his eyes. His gaze was fierce as he looked above. I think all of you are asking to die. In the end, he didn't dare to fly into the air and fight with Zhong Shou. Instead, He took out 3 black talismans and carefully smeared his own blood on them. He activated them one by one and shot them into the sky, only to see that within the black talisman, numerous spirits and evil spirits of various shapes and sizes pounced out from within. Handu, who had been quietly watching from the side, instantly squinted his eyes. Evil sealing violent talisman? So this person was from the 10,000 Ghost Mountain. These spirits and evil spirits weren't as simple as the 2 million spirits and could be easily controlled. They all pounced towards Zhongsho. Some of the weaker ones were controlled by the ashen white sword glow and merged into the Styx River Death sword attack. However, more of them bore the vast sword light and tried to drill into Zhongsho's body. Like they had been hungry for tens of thousands of years, they were filled with a shocking violent energy and wanted to swallow Zhongsho's flesh and blood. There were also numerous fierce intents that attacked Zhongsho's mind. Tens of thousands of fantasies were born, trying to draw out Zhongsho's greed and fear to take away his life. Even with Zhongsho's strong intent, his body couldn't help but fall down. Weihai scoffed softly. It was okay if this kid didn't use this sword technique that could control tens of thousands of souls and control death energy. However, after using it, it gave him a chance. To control the death sword spirits, one had to walk with the death energy spirits and be one with the evil spirits. He took a step forward and was about to attack. However, Zhongsho, who was in midair, suddenly opened his eyes and hollered. Evil spirits and monsters, scram! A vast pillar of pale white chi suddenly soared into the sky. All the spirits and evil spirits instantly scattered. Chapter 653. Oh, what a familiar aura! This was a dead silent world. There were mountains, plains, rivers, and also large rivers. However, there were no plants and no living beings. The sky was dark and numerous soul flames floated about. Looking down on the ground, one could see numerous lifeless beings walking on the ground. At this moment, at the peak of a tall mountain, within a gray-white palace, a mutter spread out. The voice was so soft that one couldn't hear it, but near the palace, it caused a calamity. Numerous flames were extinguished because of the voice. At this moment, deep in the palace, a skeleton-like person sitting on a golden throne opened his eyes in a daze. He said that he opened his eyes, but in truth, there was a ball of soul flames burning in each of the 2 holes. Maybe because he had slept for many years, his mind was a blur and he was lost. This is the king path. No, it is actually the aura of a saint emperor. The last 2 words were spat out from his mouth. That skeleton suddenly stood up. His eyes were filled with shock and reminiscence. Saint Emperor energy, he hadn't felt it for many years. Was it 10,000 years or 20,000 years? It was so long ago that he couldn't remember. However, why did this aura feel a little different? The Saint Chi interacted with Nether Chi. Evil spirits scattered. Who knew that such a person would appear in the world of life? Who knows whether or not this person was within that person's expectations? He suppressed his laughter and blinked his mouth, giving out a cracking sound like he was laughing. However, the skeleton suddenly froze. Evil spirits scattered? Death energy mixed? What was going on? How could a saint king control death energy? How could he mix with death energy? Before he died, there should be millions of evil spirits and evil energy that couldn't get close to him. How could the aura of a saint spread into the nether region? A sense of danger suddenly surged into his heart. However, for some reason, he was surprised. He suddenly stood up, and his vast intent swept out in all directions. He searched all around for where the aura was at. However, at this moment, it was already too late and he couldn't find any tracks at all. The skeleton wasn't in the mood to laugh anymore and was in deep thought. An instant later, the white flames around its body suddenly flickered. A voice was transmitted from an unknown location through the air. Did you sense what happened just now? Skeleton remained silent. Wasn't this nonsense? If it hadn't sensed something, why would it search this area with its spiritual senses? Then, do you know where it is? I wonder who did this in the real world? The skeleton remained silent. Even if it knew, it wouldn't tell this person. So you didn't find it? It seems that you need to wash your head. You've really become muddle-headed after sleeping for more than 10,000 years. Logically speaking, he should be furious after being ridiculed like this. However, the skeleton wasn't angry at all. It was funny to say that after the undead died, their 7 emotions became indifferent, but they were incomparably attached to the word life. As long as it didn't affect its survival, it would never get angry. Furthermore, this fellow was right. His mind was indeed a little slow. He was just a little bit away from being able to find his track. However, at this moment, it actually had no idea how to deal with that fellow. Was it swallowed in one gulp? Was it going to take a look at the soul of a saint in the human world? Or was it going to bring him to the nether death world and make him its king? Maybe not finding it would be a good thing instead. I want this person, he has some use. So, the world of the living can't be entered easily. However, I heard that your toy is about to wake up from the grave? The skeleton curled its lips to express that it was unhappy. Although it actually didn't have lips. That was its daughter, not a toy. Okay. Even if she is your child. I want her to listen to my orders and help me do some things in the real world. I can also help her wake up. The skeleton laughed again and stretched out its hand. You want benefits? You really aren't someone who is willing to take a loss. A black light suddenly jumped into the air and landed in the skeleton's hand. It was a black pillar like a relic, but it was filled with death energy. The skeleton clenched its hand and smiled in satisfaction. Okay. It was majestic and solemn, like a huge bell ringing. Then, it looked towards the east, the intersection of life and death, the place where the 9 Een gathered. On the deck of the 9-toothed cloud ship, Kong Yao looked at the ashen white energy that charged up dozens of miles away. Zhong Shou's body was tough to deal with. Even if the evil spirits were strong and their intents were tough to fight against, in this world, there would be the intent of heaven and earth to block it. There shouldn't be anything strange about this scene. However, with her talent, she could vaguely see the pure white aura within the death aura. This Saint King white energy was so thick that it could appear in the world? However, why was it able to mix with the death energy? The 2 million vengeful spirits in the air weren't scattered by the white energy? What was going on? Kong Yao instantly groaned, rubbing her brow in annoyance. She really couldn't understand all of this. She couldn't help but subconsciously touch her forehead. Just a month ago, she personally gave up on this bloodline ability. She wasn't willing to let it affect her judgment. She also wasn't willing to lose her lifespan for that fellow. At this moment, she really wanted to use her heaven's eye to see what was going on over there. Speaking of which, when she abandoned her heaven's eye, that bone-deep pain, like 10,000 blades cutting her body, was something she still couldn't forget. However, it might have been a blessing in disguise, to be able to return to the battlefield once more. She noticed that her grasp of battle opportunities was much sharper. She didn't look at the entire situation, but she was able to understand the entire situation. Controlling the nether death chi, what kind of sword technique is that? 9 nether opening, announcing your death? The ones who were talking were Zhao Yanran and the others. Hu Zhongyuan, who was standing beside, mocked. Now you know that you have a headache? If you don't have the ability, then don't take the commander's seal. Kong Yao expressionlessly looked at this fellow, her hand caressing the imperial sword that Zhong Shou gave her. She acted like she was about to move, only to see Hu Zhongyuan retract his neck and take a step back. Kong Yao couldn't help but smile, following which her expression turned solemn. General Ling, please lead the 5 towns and prepare to disembark. The other forces can follow behind. After they disembark, General Ling will take command. General who can lead the troops to defend the ship? Zhong Gang frowned when he heard that. At this moment, the spiritual formation on the island hasn't been broken. Isn't it a little too early? Once all of you are prepared, it should be able to be broken. Her voice was really calm, really casual. Zhong Gang thought about it and looked once more. There was nothing he could retort, so he said seriously, "Why not me but Ling Xian?" Hu Zhongyuan was also furious. Even his experience was older than Ling Xian's. Why did he have to defend the ship and watch others gain merit? Kong Yao has been in Gantian for a few months. When she was bored, she investigated the battle traces of the Gantian generals. Kong Yao's eyes flashed. Right, Inspector has fought 173 battles in these 10 years. In each battle, more than half of the enemy troops died. You also killed prisoners 4 times, right? Zhong Gang was startled. What did this have to do with Ling Xian commanding the troops? What I am worried about is that Inspector Zhong's killing nature is too heavy. As she said that, Kong Yao's gaze was leisurely. I think ruler wants to kill all the leaders. He still has a use for the millions of elite troops here. On the Nine-Tooth Cloud ship, they were discussing the matter of troops disembarking. Zhong Shou once again charged down with the vast death energy. However, in the depths of his eyes, it was filled with shock. This nameless sword was truly a little strange. Just now, when he was afraid of those tens of thousands of evil beings, most of them were killed by his sword intent. However, those souls and souls didn't scatter just like that. Instead, they were all absorbed into the soul sword body, disappearing without a trace. What was even weirder was that in just half a breath, another thread of weird power seeped in from the nameless sword. A drop of dark green liquid dripped into his soul ocean. His spirit immediately began to boil. Countless pale green flames began to burn as they swept towards every corner of his Yuan spirit. Zhong Shou was frightened. Only after he noticed that there was nothing wrong did he relax. At this moment, he didn't have much time to observe where this drop of green liquid came from. What exactly had happened to his divine soul? Slightly distracted, all his thoughts returned to the tip of the sword. A swordsman like him should have gone all out when he used the sword. He shouldn't have been distracted at all. This time, it was like breaking rotten bamboo. The 7th level, the 8th level, and the 9th level, the spiritual light barriers were all broken by this sword. On the last layer, Weihai probably couldn't remain calm anymore. He seemed to know what would happen once this spiritual barrier was broken. Suddenly, he threw a punch at Chu Yang. Zhong Shou's eyes flashed and then he laughed out loud. The ashen white sword glow in his hand suddenly changed, between real and illusionary. Like it stabbed out from the netherworld, there was a clang as it struck that fist. It was totally silent and had no energy at all, like it couldn't take a single hit. Weihai, on the other hand, retreated like a rabbit. He gritted his teeth and chopped off his right arm from the shoulder. The moment it was sliced off, the arm started to rot. In just a moment, only some white dust and bones were left. At this moment, Handa's face was ashen white. The great death restriction formation was helpless. The evil sealing violent talisman was also unable to get close. The spiritual formation that even 1,000,000 people couldn't do anything to was easily broken. This Zhong Shou was actually so strong? Suddenly, he recalled the warning from Dowling Vast Habitat. It was true. This head of the pinnacle sword was really invincible before the spiritual wave. At this moment, a silver-white flame burned around Zhong Shou's body. The sword in his hand slashed forwards and tore open the last spiritual barrier. Then, he laughed as he stepped on the millions of souls and walked in. Didn't you not want to give it to me? Since words won't work, I'll come in and take it myself. Chapter 655. Didn't you not want to give it to me? Since words don't work, then I will personally come in to take it. The 10 people here were all silent when they heard that. They remembered that an hour ago, The few of them were mocking Zhong Shou. However, at this moment, this person was holding a sword and standing in front of them. That killing intent surged and still hadn't disappeared. Instead, it was bone-chilling, pressing down on their hearts. Wei Hai's expression changed again and again. In the end, he took in a deep breath, smiling as he bowed towards Zhong Shou. "It is just a misunderstanding. Why do you have to do this? If the ruler wants the military power here, then I will give it to you. In the past, I was too arrogant and didn't know what was good for me. Ruler, please don't take offense. From now on, I will listen to your orders and follow your orders. However, I won't dare to not follow your orders. Moreover, since the Great Death Restriction formation is useless, then naturally, there is no need for these 10 million elite. We are willing to send these people to the ruler." Zhong Shou's eyes flashed, looking at Wei Hai with a mocking gaze. "I didn't expect you to know when to bow and when not to." Wei Hai's eyes flashed with a dark glow, showing a violent expression. Instantly, it calmed down, his face still filled with a pleasing smile. However, in the next instance, Zhong Shou laughed. "However, I don't believe it. You think that I, Zhong Shou, don't dare to offend the Taishang?" Just as Wei Hai was startled, he saw a white sword strike right at him. The path of the sword was really weird. He was looking at it, it was really clear. However, he felt that he couldn't dodge it, that any action was useless. He could only look on as the ashen white sword light touched the center of his brows. Then, with a pu sound, Wei Hai's body started to age at a shocking speed. His skin turned ashen white. In just a few breaths, he turned into white bone dust and fell to the ground. Everyone's breathing tightened once again. The few Huizhou Island city lords were filled with disbelief. Even though he was also a high-level martial artist and was not weak, he could not help but shudder. This Zhong Shou is crazy. Wei Hai was no ordinary person. He was the Taishang's second-ranked general. However, leading an army of millions, or even millions, of soldiers, they were worthy of being ministers. At this moment, this person actually killed without any hesitation. Since Wei Hai was dead, what should they do? At this moment, Zhong Shou was slightly surprised. However, this time, the nameless sword was unable to capture Wei Hai's nascent divinity. Naturally, the green liquid didn't drip into his soul ocean. Evil sealing talisman? Someone from the Thousand Ghost Mountain sect? Zhong Shou seemed to have understood something, but he didn't pay it any mind. Only a pale white death energy followed the aura that he had vaguely sensed and flew into the air. He turned his head and saw that the few Huizhou city lords were all ashen white as they bowed. Their eyes were filled with hesitation, like they wanted to say something. However, Zhong Shou was too lazy to bother. "You didn't listen to my kind words, so what is the use of begging now? From today onwards, Huizhou belongs to me. I don't need all of you." He didn't even need to use his sword. He just waved his sleeves and the thick death energy turned their bodies into ashen white dust. Such a person treated others as ants and grass. Naturally, Zhong Shou could treat them as ants and grass. Handa's body trembled when he saw this. He suppressed the fear in his heart and said solemnly, "Ruler, don't you think you are too much today? Wei Hai was one thing, but offending the monarch was his own fault. However, most of these people had been coerced into doing so. Ruler didn't even ask and directly took their lives. What kind of logic is that?" Logic? Zhong Shou was instantly delighted. Things in the world were just so weird. When you tried to reason with people, they wouldn't listen. When you were rude and unreasonable, they would try to reason with you. I am unreasonable, so what are you going to do? Haven't you heard that I have the nickname Zongbatian? Oh no. I am punishing the people and can't bear to see them suffer, which is why I sent troops to suppress them. Let's take the righteous path first. Speaking of which, when had these people ever tried to reason with the 2 million lives that had already been sacrificed? Handa held his breath and was speechless. With Zhong Shou's strength and the strength of Gantian Mountain, he had no choice. It was really impossible for them to resist such an overbearing and unreasonable attitude. As for what Zong Batian said, he didn't know what he meant. When he heard the last sentence, Handu's pupils constricted. He thought back to the words that he nearly missed. From today onwards, Huizhou belongs to me. I don't need all of you, so ruler wants to occupy my Huizhou island? That's right. He was wondering why Zhong Shou, as a hero of a generation, would be so kind-hearted. 10 million people was less than 1% of Huizhou's population. However, along with their families, it could reach hundreds of millions. They were going to die, but this monster king personally saved them. No matter how heartless a person was, they would still be deeply grateful. Although this monster king came from afar and was 10,000 miles away from Donglin. However, from today onwards, Gantian Mountain would have enough foundations in Huizhou. What peaceful means before using force. Those words were just for those people who were about to be killed, right? He felt like he had guessed Zhong Shou's thoughts. Handu's eyes were filled with rage. However, at this moment, he didn't know what he should say. Blame? He was afraid that the next one to be beheaded would be him. A moment later, he laughed coldly. Ruler really has deep thoughts. Unfortunately, you are blinded by greed. Even the Taishang wasn't willing to face the night demon race head-on. Even Dowling Vast Habitat had to avoid them. Was it so easy to deal with them? Blinded by greed? Zhong Shoxin scoffed. He knew that this person would say that. At this moment, his eyes were focused on a person. 100 miles away, a teen wearing a Mingguang armor. It was Kong Xian who was fleeing in panic. This person could be considered an extremely intelligent person. When he broke the Great Lifeless Void Restriction Formation and destroyed the island's protective spiritual formations one by one, he was already preparing to flee. At this moment, he was already far out of his field of vision. So, should he take his life or not? Speaking of which, this person was even more annoying than Weihai. This person was the one who gave up the Great Lifeless Restriction Formation. Using the vital energy of 10 million people to replace the blood sacrifice was most probably Kong Xian's idea. However, after all, this person was Kong Yao's brother. Hesitating for a moment, Zhong Shou made his decision. Since he couldn't deal with him, then he would just leave it to Kong Yao. He directly flicked his finger and a gray-white glow shot out, charging 100 miles away. Where the death energy landed, one could hear a tragic cry. Only to see Kong Xian's limbs decompose and turn into dust. It was broken at the root, but his body was perfectly fine. Zhong Shou's true qi sucked him in and he flew back from 100 miles away. Zhong Shou was shocked. The death energy that he used directly wiped out the life force in a person's body. Even if one died, there shouldn't be any pain at all. This Kong Xian cried out in such a tragic manner. Shaking his head, Zhong Shou spread out his true qi and directly tossed this person onto the nine-toothed giant ship in the distance. Then, he looked at the remaining 3 people in front of him. Whether or not you are blinded by greed, the people of the future will have their own opinions. However, I don't like what you are doing right now. Squinting, Zhong Shou's eyes were filled with killing intent and a cold glow. Xiantong, Lingming, and Luo Tiansex can each send 100 grade 7 cultivators to work for me. If that is the case, I can forgive your sins. When Hando heard this, he was so angry that he laughed. What did this Zhong Shou treat them as? Xiantong's sect had been passed down for 10,000 years in Huizhou, and when had they ever lowered their heads to a ruler? Even the dynasties of the Central Plains mostly tried to rope in people from other dynasties. This Zhong Shou, a small Gantian mountain monster king, what was he? He dared to speak to them like that. The other 2 people were also silent at this moment. Their eyes were filled with mockery. This Gantian mountain ruler is really crazy. Are you not willing? Samuraim's eyes flashed. Looking at their expressions, he knew the answer. Then, from today onwards, he would treat them as enemies. He didn't ask any more. That ashen white sword glow shone once more. The light landed on Handa's neck. A sword slashed across and a head flew off, falling to the ground. The death energy spread and his body instantly turned ashen white. At this moment, a shout spread out from the sky, "Stop!" A green-blue sword light suddenly shot down from the cloud layer. It turned into 10,000 feet long, bringing with it a deep blue lightning arc as it slashed down. Zhong Shou's brows rose up, not hesitating at all as he faced it head-on. Only to hear a light "king." That vast strength caused Zhong Shou's body to sink down by half an inch. The 10,000 feet of land around him all caved in. Intermediate spirit realm? Just one strike and Zhong Shou knew that this person's strength had reached the intermediate spirit realm. The suppression of heaven and earth on him was extremely little. It seemed like the spiritual wave had really come early. However, so what if this person was spirit realm? After blocking several strikes, after each strike, Zhong Shou's body would sink down by half an inch. The attacks were like a storm, not giving him any chance to fight back. However, at the 17th sword, the ashen white sword light in Zhong Shou's hand suddenly expanded, turning into 100,000 feet long as it swept across the sky. The sky full of sword shadows were all wiped out. Large amounts of death energy spread in the air. Zhong Shou's body rose up and flew out of the hole. He looked forward coldly, only to see a familiar person standing opposite him. It was Wuji. At this moment, he had already sucked out Mingdu's soul and was trying his best to remove the death energy. Above him was a green-shirt Taoist. At this moment, his expression was really ugly. He held a sword in his hand, but the originally green-white sword body was wrapped in death energy. Chapter 656. Just now, out of the few swords, the green-shirt Taoist was the first to attack. Dozens of swords, it looked like he was suppressing Zhong Shou such that he couldn't move and could only passively block. However, at this moment, anyone with eyes could see that the one who was at a disadvantage was this person. It wasn't Zhong Shou. At this moment, the sword in his hand was also gradually decaying. Death energy didn't only target living beings, it could wipe out the life of all living beings. Zhong Shou expressionlessly looked at Wuji and the Taoist, thinking that the two of them couldn't take it anymore, and came out in the end. The sword intense soul suppression was like a flood, covering thousands of miles. Cultivator Wuji, it has been a long time. Did the two of you enjoy the show just now? Killing intent was like a blade, cold and chilly as it spread out, wrapping around Wuji's neck. The nameless sword in his hand buzzed like it was responding to its master. The green-shirt Taoist seemed to be furious, but he also knew that at this moment, he wasn't the opponent of Zhong Shou. If he acted carelessly, he would only attract unforeseen consequences. He could only bear with it. In terms of cultivation, naturally he was much better. However, in terms of sword techniques, Zhong Shou was much better than him. That King Path martial arts made one wary. If he went all out, could this Zhong Shou decide his life and death? Wuji's expression was slightly awkward. Wuji greets ruler. He bowed from afar and then said in an unbelievable tone, in just a short dozen days, who knew that ruler's cultivation would actually improve. To say that it is 1,000 miles a day isn't an exaggeration. In just a year and a half, you will be able to charge into the spirit realm. I congratulate you in advance. He remembered that when they were in the underground lake, Zhong Shou found it tough to deal with the assassination of the spirit realm expert and nearly died. However, at this moment, he was able to deal with it easily. Zhong Shou's lips curled up when he heard this, and then he gave out an evil smile. Are you threatening me? His barriers from heaven was something that everyone in the cloud world knew about. Countless people were waiting for him to break through the heavenly barrier. Speaking of which, a few days ago, the Sky Demon Vast Habitat Envoy also said something similar. How dare you? Wuji's heart shuddered. At this moment, there was a bitter taste in his mouth. If he spoke too softly and made Dowling Vast Habitat lose face, he would definitely be blamed by his fellow sect members. However, if he was too forceful today, he would definitely infuriate the Demon King. To be able to attack Handu, he probably didn't care about Dowling Vast Habitat at all. It wasn't impossible for them to kill him here. A lack of forbearance in small matters will spoil great plans. After pondering for a moment, Wuji said, I wonder how my fellow cultivators offended the monarch? Have they reached the point where they have to use their weapons? I just don't like him. His words stunned the people in front of him. Zhong Shou laughed again. Of course, he was just joking. In the face of a great enemy, I do not wish to be surrounded by enemies. Since the 3 sects of Huizhou can't be used by me, I will wipe them out. Xiantong, Lingming, and Luotian sects had deep roots in Huizhou. Numerous disciples and families were here and their roots were intertwined. If he had any thoughts of betrayal when he was fighting the enemy with all his strength, it would be the same as stabbing him in the heart. To fight the night demons, he needed to gather the strength of the entire Huizhou. With that, Xiantong and the 3 sects would be the biggest obstacle. Since they couldn't offer hostages to him, they could only be wiped out first. So that is the case. Although our Dowling Vast Habitat isn't willing to fight the night demons alone, we also don't want to be enemies with Gantian Mountain. At least before Gantian Mountain and the night demons both suffered heavy losses, they didn't plan to be enemies with this lunatic. One sentence showed Dowling Vast Habitat's attitude. Wuji smiled. How about this? Xiantong and the 3 sects will back out of Huizhou within 7 days. Will the monarch be at ease? Zhong Shou's eyelids closed slightly and he didn't reply. Wuji knew that the person opposite him wasn't satisfied, so he continued. Within 10 years, our Dowling Vast Habitat and Xiantong and the 3 sects won't interfere in Huizhou matters. I will ask our Vast Habitat ruler to send a letter of promise over within 3 days. Only then did Zhong Shou smile. He was waiting for these words. With this promise, he could truly be at ease to fight the night demons. Looking at Handu, who was left with only his soul, Zhong Shou laughed. With a wave of his hand, he retracted the death energy from his soul. He waved his sleeves to tell the few of them that they could scram. At this moment, the battle situation on Lianyun main island was pretty much settled. A few large aero platforms were destroyed. The Blood Cloud cavalry had already charged in. Ling Xian led 20 army towns and boarded the floating island. They gathered their troops to force the enemy troops to surrender one by one. The soldiers from the various Huizhou cities were still okay as they were used to the days when the flags on the city walls changed. The few city lords had already died and they didn't have any heart to resist anymore. Apart from those trusted elites who were still fighting to the death, the other people all placed down their weapons. Only the close to 600,000 Taishang cavalry under Weihai were a little problematic. It would take some effort to force them to surrender. Luckily, they had already won and Zhong Shou didn't need to worry too much about it. Expressionlessly looking around, Zhong Shou dissipated the death energy around his body. 2 million Yin souls also left with a howl. However, they didn't go far and instead lingered above the Lianyun main island. Behind him, there seemed to be a creaking sound, as if a door was closing. Zhong Shou was a little distracted as he looked above. In the end, he sighed and retracted his gaze. It seemed like he would have to invite a few more eminent monks of the Buddhist sect to come over and perform a ritual here to reincarnate all these Yin souls. He sighed in his heart. This was the only thing he could do for these dead people. Only now did he have the mood to take a look at his body. This time he used the Styx River Death Sword. He had lost a lot of his lifespan. There was also the green liquid that had dripped into his soul sea, as well as the azure fire burning in his origin soul. Both were extremely puzzling. Looking into his body for a moment, he was slightly startled. This time the loss of life force in his body was unexpectedly small. Less than half a month had passed since he lost his lifespan. Moreover, after using this sword technique, his mind didn't become cold like before and his reactions were slow. Looking at his soul ocean, Zhong Shou relaxed. Although the green flames looked like flames, they didn't show signs of merging with the Liu family bloodline. Following which he was shocked. The green flames were still burning and spreading all about. Unexpectedly, it was his own soul power that had been affected. Looking at it now, it seemed much purer. The pale cyan fire was also providing him with an enormous amount of soul power. The consumption of his soul ocean in the battle today was pretty much negligible. What was going on? Zhong Shou was in deep thought. He knew that he should go into secluded meditation once more to study it. A few days later, within a large tent, Zhong Shou's eyes shone with a weird glow as he looked in front of him. The nameless sword was hovering in front of him, its blade horizontal. Zhong Shou himself was still in deep thought. In the past few days, he had more or less figured out the function of this sword. This sword could swallow one's soul and turn it into soul liquid. However, it wasn't like his heaven-swallowing energy conversion technique, which directly swallowed. Instead, it was used to wash the sword body and provide fuel for its master. The so-called fuel referred to the green liquid that dripped into the soul ocean. As for the ash-green flames, they burned with it as the source. Not only could it help one train the soul, but it could also provide him with huge amounts of soul power. Zhong Shou looked in front of him and saw an iron cage being carried by a few soldiers and sent to the front of his tent. Within the iron cage was a grade 7 beast that was tightly locked up. It was personally captured by Zhong Yuan and sent here. There were 10 of such cages outside the tent. However, most of the beasts within had already died. Is this a red flame rat? With a thought, the nameless sword in front of Zhong Shou flew into the iron cage. The sword pierced into the skinny beast's head, and then a spiritual light flashed. A moment later, it turned around and returned to Zhong Shou's hands. Grabbing the sword handle, a thread of external strength followed his chakra meridians and entered his god cloud body. A moment later, a drop of green liquid dripped into his soul. However, compared to the tens of thousands of evil demons a few days ago, they were much smaller and their color was also much lighter. The green flames that burned were far from the aura of that day. Zhong Shou didn't care, waiting for the green flames to spread around his soul. Threads of pure soul power seeped out. Only then did he cast a spell and a ball of red flame appeared in his hand. This was the sky-burning flame. However, at this moment, the flame was much hotter. Even Zhong Shou, who was a fire wielder. At this moment, he only felt a burning pain in his palm. Zhong Shou didn't care, still sitting cross-legged on the spot, quietly sensing this ball of red flames. He didn't let go of any changes, until the green flames in his soul ocean were totally extinguished. Only then did he come back to his senses and stop his visualization. As expected, depending on the element of the sucking soul, it would strengthen the spells. The red flame rat is a fire element beast and is good at controlling fire. Naturally, it would greatly strengthen my sky-burning flame and power. The thicker the green liquid, the stronger the increase. Where did this sword come from? Zhong Shou was at a loss. Who was the one who gave him such a treasure? Ordinary Dharma treasures mostly contained one or two types of laws, and could only strengthen the power of one type of spirit art or possess one type of divine ability. Even the top magical treasure-level spiritual weapons contained many laws and couldn't clash with one another. However, he had tested it these few days. This nameless sword, no matter what kind of spell it was, could increase it. Absorbing the element of the soul would strengthen the spell. If 4 or 5 elements were swallowed at the same time, then it was okay. Naturally, it couldn't be unlimited. The nameless sword's ability could only be used after it devoured the soul of the target. When the ash-green flames were completely exhausted, they would immediately recover. However, just these abilities were already shocking. Chapter 657. He really didn't know who gave him this sword. Zhong Shou shook his head, sending a thread of spiritual sense into the sword body. However, moments later, he sighed and retracted his spiritual sense from the sword body. During these 2 days, he even used the Book of Ian as well as the few remaining mind stones he had. He borrowed a full 10 days of time, but the outcome was really disappointing. He could still roughly sense the spiritual formation veins within the Avicii throne. However, he was totally confused about this nameless sword and didn't understand its mysteries. If it wasn't for the sword body, all the signs would be that of a magical treasure. He would even think that this item was a celestial artifact or even a god artifact. He really didn't know who crafted this sword. The more he thought about it, the more confused he got. If it was a gift from an elder, then he really owed them a huge favor, following which would be the life force in his body. This was something that Zhong Shou also didn't understand. Why didn't his lifespan consume any? Although Wei Hai was a despicable person, there was one thing that he said that was right. To control the soul of this death sword, one had to walk with the soul of death energy and be one with evil. How could such an evil sword technique not harm one's body? However, during these few days, no matter how he tried to investigate, he was unable to find the source. He started from the roots of the Styx River Death Sword, and then started from his newly created world-shocking spirit art. However, in the end, he gained nothing. His cultivation method had the effect of yin and yang, but it had nothing to do with life and death laws. The black and white whole dharma in his soul, one swallowed and one dispersed. It was endless and wouldn't weaken or stop. It could barely be related to life and death energy. However, it wasn't at the level where it could cancel out the death energy. What was going on? Zhong Shou sighed once more, only feeling that his secluded meditation was a waste of effort. He didn't accomplish anything at all, so he gave up on his plans to continue researching. Moreover, at this moment there were more important things that he needed to deal with. He had already spent 2 days on this nameless sword. As for the other things, he couldn't delay. He walked out of the tent and towards the side. Not long later, he arrived at another luxuriously decorated tent. This was the commander tent that Wei Hai used before. He saw that Kong Yao was frowning as she sat on the main seat. She seemed to be worried about something, her brows furrowed. It made people feel pity for her, and they wished they could walk over and smooth out the creases with their own hand. In front of Kong Yao laid a person. Accurately, it was a human stick, whose limbs were broken and only his body. It was Kong Xian. Zhong Shou was startled, hesitating for a moment before standing outside the carriage. After a long while, he heard Zhong Shou, "Zhong, I really don't know how to deal with elder brother. If ruler had been more vicious that day, maybe I wouldn't have been so annoyed." "Worry?" Kong Xian scoffed and then laughed out loud, raising his head high. "Kong Yao, you finally said those words. These few years, you have always been respectful in front of the elders and brothers. Even if you were humiliated, you wouldn't bother about what others said about you. However, I know that a woman like you has a heart as venomous as a scorpion. You must have hated us to the bone since long ago and only wish for us to die as soon as possible, right?" Kong Yao smiled, slightly distracted. She was too lazy to argue with Kong Xian. Hate? She did. If it wasn't for these cold race people, her poor mother wouldn't have died so early. However, at that time, she wanted to rise up. She wanted the race to know that her mother didn't give birth to her by mistake. However, each time she had some achievements, these race people would reject and fear her more and more. However, today she was already in Gantian Mountain. Her name was removed from the family tree, and she had nothing to do with the Kong family. Everything in the past had become clouds of the past. Her thoughts of bringing glory to her family had totally faded away. Instead, it was the hatred buried in her heart that wrapped around her heart. At this moment, Kong Xian suddenly frowned. That Zhong Shou really gave you the position of commander? He entrusted hundreds of thousands of elite troops to you? Kong Yao was awakened by his words and came back to her senses. Speaking of which, she was also surprised. To say that he entrusted her wasn't an exaggeration. During these 2 days, he didn't say a single word to interfere with her decisions. Although she was in the army, she was in secluded meditation alone in the tent. She could decide on all matters. Instinctively, Kong Yao used her hand to touch the purple gold seal. Under this purple gold seal, there were the words, Left Army Inspector. She was the person with the highest military position in Gantian Mountain apart from Chiu Wei. However, her military experience in the Taishang wasn't too eye-catching. In those 10 over battles, although the results were amazing, compared to those famous Taishang generals and even the many generals of Gantian Mountain, she was just average. She really didn't understand why Zhong Shou would have such high hopes for her. She remembered that her childhood wish was to lead 1,000,000 troops and sweep the battlefield. However, now that she got what she wanted, she only felt a heavy pressure on her chest, like she couldn't take it anymore. Speaking of which, should she sincerely serve that despicable person? However, why did her brother ask about this matter? Kong Yao doesn't know what ruler means. However, the army on the island is under my command. That's true. Kong Xian broke out into a laugh. Apart from disbelief in his eyes, it was also filled with mocking intent. This monster king's eyesight is really interesting. Of all people to use, why did he have to make you the commander? Didn't he know that Kong Yao was fated to be unlucky? No matter what kind of fate it is, once it has something to do with you, it will be filled with calamities? He raised his head and looked at Kong Yao in deep thought, the mocking intent in his eyes becoming thicker. You bitch, you don't have any other skills, but your looks are not bad. That Zhong Shou is so hot-blooded, no wonder he would be charmed by you. Zhong Shou listened outside the tent and couldn't help but exclaim. There was actually such a saying? He instantly understood. No wonder there were so many weird things happening in the Kong family. Thinking about it, Kong Yao's life was filled with calamities. Only those who were close to her would die a horrible death. To say that she was fated to be unlucky was true. Speaking of which, the Lianyun Island matter was caused by Kong Yao. Kong Yao's expression was also absent-minded. When she was young, she had heard people talking about her every day without any fear. It was only after she grew up that it became better. She subconsciously shook her head. Father said before that Kong Yao was the army-breaking army commander and was in line with Yaoguang. The weather that day wasn't a calamity. She knew that these words were useless, but she still wanted to argue. Kong Xian grinned and laughed silently. You are also from the Kong family. As the saying goes, you can't judge by yourself. He is your father, so how can he judge? If you are really a general, why would the Emperor of Taishang bear to marry you to a foreign country? Your father used his life as an official to guarantee that you, Kong Yao, would be able to do great things for the Taishang in exchange for the chance to lead the army. Do you really think that His Majesty would appreciate a little brat like you for no reason? Kong Yao was startled. She had never heard of such words before. So that was the case? Why didn't anyone mention it to her? It was your father who negotiated with my father and agreed to reject the position of imperial astronomer in exchange for it. He ordered us not to mention it. Scoffing coldly, Kong Xian continued, however, what about now? His Majesty is really disappointed in you. Do you know what imperial teacher Zhongshuan said in private? He said that you are destined to be a disaster and might drag down the fate of the Taishang country. He was destined to die within 30 years, dying on the battlefield. When His Majesty heard that you were trapped in Gantian Mountain and that the monster king liked you, he was delighted. He probably wanted to send you away, Kong Yao. He laughed out loud. That Zhong Shou was blind to let you be the commander. This person was charmed by beauty and did things so carelessly. The day of the country being wiped out is not far away. No, I think that when the night demons descend, it will be the start of the destruction of Gantian Mountain. When Kong Yao heard that, she only felt her breathing stop, her vital energy surging. She felt that her beliefs in the past, and what she wanted in the past, were all collapsing. She was like a corpse as she sat paralyzed on the chair. After a long while, she opened her eyes. There were no emotional fluctuations at all. Leave. Kong Xian originally thought that this time he was definitely going to die. He didn't have anything to worry about and just said whatever he wanted. When he heard those words, he was startled as he looked above. I will send people to send you to Huizhou. Whether you live or die, it will depend on you. After she said that, she pulled out her sword and slashed at the table, cutting a hole. From today on, I, Kong Yao, will cut all ties with your Kong family. If we meet on the battlefield, I won't show any mercy. You must remember that, men. Outside the tent, there were a few guards waiting. At this moment, they were summoned by Kong Yao and instantly walked in to drag Kong Xian away. The latter laughed out maniacally. Good, good, good. Who knew that I would have a chance to live? Remember, my eyes will see how you, Kong Yao, die and how you won't show any mercy to my Kong family. I will make that Zhong Shou pay with his body for the hatred of my arms and legs. Zhong Shou shook his head when he heard that. This person was really crazy. He wanted to do something to this person. However, when he thought about how this person might make Kong Yao truly submit, he instantly felt delighted and magnanimously didn't bother about it. He didn't wait any longer and stepped into the tent. Kong Yao's face was originally tensed up. When she saw Zhong Shou enter, she was startled. Only then did she relax slightly. Greetings, ruler. She expressionlessly bowed and then directly asked. Ruler said that you could give Kong Yao 1,000,000 troops to fight this battle. When will Gantian Mountain be willing to move the remaining troops over? Zhong Shou blinked and expressed his shock. Don't tell me there are less than 1,000,000 troops here? There were 500,000 to 600,000 Taishang rulers here. As for the Huizhou City Alliance army, there were around 200,000 who were comparable to Gantian Mountain. If they searched the various cities of Huizhou, they would have at least 2,000,000 elite troops. Kong Yao instantly groaned. 2 days ago, she had guessed that this would happen. Chapter 658. Kong Yao was a little speechless. Just 1,000,000 people here with different thoughts wanted to go up against the night demons? That was just wishful thinking. However, at this moment Gantian Mountain was in a tough spot. Unless Kong Yao resigned from her position as left army inspector. For some reason, she was a little unwilling. Kong Yao also knew that Donglin Cloud Continent had just calmed down not long ago. She indeed couldn't move too many troops. Thinking about it for a moment, she opened her mouth. Forget it. I only need 20 more towns. Is it possible to take them from Donglin? Apart from that, I heard that ruler is training the Great Qin elite soldiers. Can you give me 2 towns of Big Dipper sword soldiers and 2 towns of Red Big Dipper crossbow soldiers? Zhong Shou frowned slightly. How was Kong Yao's news so accurate? At this moment, Gantian Mountain was only planning to train the sword soldiers and crossbow soldiers into 5 towns each. As long as they lowered the requirements, it would be easy to find suitable soldiers. What made things tough was the equipment. There were some materials, but even if Gantian Mountain and Kongqi sect went all out, within a month, they could at most make 20,000 sets each. Kong Yao actually predicted the number of troops Gantian Mountain could form. He roughly knew what she was planning to do. After these 4 towns were formed, there might not be a chance to send them to Huizhou Island. Why not send them over first and directly train them in Huizhou? His eyes flashing, Zhong Shou nodded without hesitation. Okay. He didn't doubt the people he used, but if he didn't, he wouldn't use them. He had no way to deal with them, so he could only rely on the strength of this future top general. The army god who would win every battle couldn't fall here, at the hands of an opponent who had already lost to her. What he needed to do was to give Kong Yao more chips and more support. Kong Yao was startled and a little surprised. She was asking for so much, but Zhong Shou actually didn't bargain with her? Following which, he took out a map of Huizhou Island and drew a line in the middle. He said seriously, "That day when I saw the army at the World River, it was indeed really strong. Even though they had lost half of their forces, it would still be difficult to defeat them. However, the night demon had come from afar, and the giant tree he resided in had already been destroyed. Most of the rations they brought were lost in the chaotic space. With such a treasury, there shouldn't be much left. Therefore, scorched earth and cleared the fields was the most important task. With this as the boundary, please send troops to chase the people here to the west of Huizhou. Please build a camp on Seven Cloud Mountain and gather all the grain and resources east of Huizhou here." Zhong Shou took a look at the map and sucked in a breath of cold air. This move of Kong Yao's could really be said to be extremely vicious. Although on the map, the center was the boundary. However, Huizhou's land was mostly in the east. With this stroke, the area within 10,000 miles was turned into an empty dead zone. He was obviously forcing the night demon to fight to the death beneath Seven Cloud Mountain. However, although this move forced hundreds of millions of people to abandon their homes and land, it was better than losing their lives. "You are the left army inspector, so you can decide on your own." Kong Yao smiled sweetly. If she could really do this, then she would have a 20% chance of success. Apart from that, ruler, please order Kongqi and Pill Fountain sects to rush out some great light talismans. The more the better. They also need to be sent to Gantian within a month. Great Light Talisman? Zhong Shou was stunned. The Great Light Talisman was a Grade 4 talisman and was much stronger than the Light Gathering Talisman that Zhao Yanran used that day. Although those night demons were afraid of light, they had fought in other worlds for tens of thousands of years and had been through many wars. There were at least 800 worlds that had been conquered by him, if not 1,000. This weakness shouldn't be considered a weakness. He didn't believe that those night demon generals wouldn't be prepared. How useful could these great light talismans be? However, Zhong Shou thought about it carefully and didn't care. Anyways, these great light talismans weren't worth much, so it was okay to try. "Everything is up to you. Then I won't let you down." He bowed solemnly. Kong Yao tilted her head and looked at Zhong Shou, hesitating slightly. After a long while, when Zhong Shou thought that there was something wrong with his face, Kong Yao couldn't help but ask, "When did ruler come and how much did you hear?" Zhong Shou smiled and didn't speak. He had seen the entire show just now. Kong Yao looked at his expression and knew the gist of it. She couldn't help but be curious. "Isn't ruler afraid? Aren't you afraid that my fate will drag down Gantian? Aren't you afraid that Kong Yao is useless in this battle and will lose to the night demons?" Zhong Shou smiled in disdain. "What fate divination? I don't believe in it. You come from a family of scholars and should know that the fate of the people in the world has many variables. There is no fixed logic, so why do you care so much? As they say, humans will win against the heavens. Are we really just going to accept it?" It wasn't that he didn't believe it, but he believed in his own eyes more. During the battle a few days ago, Kong Yao's command could only be said to be average and not outstanding. However, this woman's grasp of the personality and ability of the generals was admirable. What was hard to come by was that her control of the battle was also at the peak. She also guessed that he wanted to control the hundreds of thousands of troops here. As for the fate divination, he had the Book of Ian Extreme Life and also grasped the luck word God talisman. Actually, in this aspect, he wasn't weaker than some outstanding masters. However, because he understood it deeply, he didn't believe that fate couldn't be changed, that luck couldn't be reversed. If the fate of the people in the world was already decided, in that case, why were there still so many people in this world who were so diligently seeking to know their own fate? Kong Yao, on the other hand, was in a daze once more. Her eyes flickered and her pretty face alternated between red and white. In the end, she gritted her teeth and took off a silver necklace from her neck and passed it over. "Wear this on your body, remember to wear it every day." Zhong Shou was startled and accepted the necklace. It looked really normal, apart from the exquisite carvings, there was nothing special about it. That necklace was a red gem. Looking closely, there were actually runes flashing within. It was actually a magical treasure that was crafted with a really exquisite method. However, as for what use it was exactly, he couldn't see it. He sniffed and could smell a bit of frankincense. Studying it carefully, he didn't understand. Zhong Shou's eyes were filled with doubt. Is this thing a token of love? All of a sudden, he didn't know whether he should accept it or reject it. Kong Yao's face instantly flushed red. She thought to herself that this Zhong Shou really didn't know what was good for him. That Saint King White energy could already be manifested in the world. Not long later, the cries of the dragon and phoenix wouldn't be able to hide from people. This was the image of the Saint Emperor. Although it could attract all the talents of the world, the Confucians of the world all wanted it. However, there was also a chance that it would attract calamity. Wasn't that why the Wen King was trapped by others? This necklace was something that Kong Rui asked for her. As she was born with the army breaking technique, since young, she was surrounded by vengeful energy. If one didn't pay attention, it would affect the people around her. This was why she needed to use this item to suppress it. It was said that it had the ability to lock down luck. At this moment, it was most suitable for Zhong Shou. She didn't think too much before, but who knew that Zhong Shou would make such a joke? However, for some reason, she gritted her teeth and didn't explain. In her heart, there was also a bit of hope that she shouldn't have. In the end, Zhong Shou still hung the necklace around his neck. Although he didn't know what Kong Yao's intentions were, he knew that this girl didn't have any bad intentions towards him. Coincidentally, at this moment, Zhong Shou's expression turned solemn. He spread out his spiritual sense and sensed the potential around. Threads of energy shook. He walked out of the tent and looked up at the sky, only to see that the originally blue sky was now covered in spiderweb-like cracks. Slightly shocked, Zhong Shou and Kong Yao exchanged glances with one another. They both knew that the Night Demon army had started to act. Just as the two of them looked at one another, the sky seemed to be unable to take the pressure and collapsed. A redwood great boat, whose bow alone was more than 1,000 feet wide, suddenly crashed into the sea. Hundreds and thousands of night demons covered the sky as they flew into the cloud world. At this moment, on Lianyun Island, hundreds of aero platforms, hundreds of cloud ships, close to 100,000 giant crossbows appeared. Without needing Kong Yao to give the order, they all fired and covered the sky. After which, with a loud bang, the bow of the scarlet wood large boat was forcefully shattered without any suspense, and began to shrink back. A large half of the thousands of night demons fell. Only a little over 1,000 managed to escape. Zhong Shou's face didn't show much joy. He knew that this was just Prince Jia Mingluo probing, and Kong Yao gave him the strongest counterattack. However, the toughest days were just about to arrive. Pretty much at the same time, in the imperial capital of the Central Cloud Continent, Yin picked up a document. It came from the east of the Central Cloud Continent, the place he didn't want to bother about the most. The things that were mentioned were within his expectations. The night demon race was finally about to start then. He instinctively looked at the table in front of him, and a dark expression flashed across his eyes. This imperial desk was brand new, but he didn't really like it. However, The one he liked the most was personally smashed into pieces by him a few days ago. This Zhong Shou. Although he didn't like Wei Hai and didn't pay much attention to him, after all, he was his subject. He was his subject, a dog that he raised. This Zhong Shou actually dared to do that? How arrogant and rude, how bold! If it was 20 years ago, he would be 20 years younger. He would definitely send troops to suppress them and let these barbarians know the strength of a great country. However, he couldn't do that now. Suddenly, a sentence in the document jumped into his eyes. Setting up the 5 army inspector in front of the palace to lead the army of a country. Kong Yao will be the left army inspector to lead all Huizhou matters. This decree has been sent to the Gantian army a few days ago. Inu was startled and then scoffed coldly. He casually tossed the document to the side. Half a month later, let's see what he can do. Maybe he won't even need half a month. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.